The date is May 21st, 2019. The time is 8:53. Present in the Internal Affairs Division office is Officer Jaron Robinet, Josh Olander, Sergeant Ryan Bullard, and myself, Sergeant Don Schumacher. The purpose of this meeting is to conduct an interview of Officer Jared Robinet, who is an employee with the Sacramento Police Department in the capacity of police officer. This is an administrative investigation on the charge of excessive force, firearm discharge, neglect of duty, and improper tactics involving officers Jaron Robinet and Terrence Mercadal. This is an administrative investigation only on these charges. Do you understand that?
I do.
However, since the allegations indicate that a crime may have been committed, I am advising you that 1. You have the right to remain silent. 2. Anything you say may be used against you in court. 3. You have the right to the presence of an attorney before and during any questioning. 4. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed to you free of charge before any questioning if you want. Do you understand each of these rights that I have explained to you?
Yes.
Having these rights in mind, do you wish to talk to us now?
No.
Although you have the right to remain silent and not to incriminate yourself, your silence can be deemed insubordination and result in administrative discipline. Do you understand that based upon the authority vested in me by the Chief of Police, I am ordering you to answer all of our questions?
Yes.
Any statement made under compulsion of a threat of discipline cannot be used against you in a later criminal proceeding. However, if you do not answer our questions truthfully and fully, a charge of insubordination may be imposed, which could result in discipline up to and including termination. Do you understand this is only an administrative investigation?
Yes.
Do you understand the allegations?
Yes.
Do you understand that I am ordering you to answer our questions and that if you do not answer them truthfully and fully, it could result in disciplinary action up to and including termination?
I do.
For the record, please state and spell your name.
My name is Jared Robinet. First name J-A-R-E-D. Last name R-O-B-I-N-E-T.
Did you graduate from the Sacramento Police Academy?
I did.
When did you graduate?
June 2014.
Do you have any prior law enforcement experience?
I do.
Okay, and can you describe what that is?
I had 5 years, roughly, with the United States Border Patrol.
That was a sworn officer position.
Sworn federal agent.
Did you have any kind of specialized training and assignment at that prior agency?
Mobile field force kind of stuff. It was essentially a tactical team that would go out and we were regular patrol agents, but we would go out in hot calls and set it up for BORTAC to respond. BORTAC being essentially what a SWAT team is.
How do you spell that, BORTAC?
B-O-R-T-A-C. Border Patrol Tactical.
What is your current assignment and shift?
Currently, I'm assigned to the Neighborhood Crimes Unit. I work through...
And how long have you been in that current assignment?
Roughly a year and 3 months.
What was your assignment and shift in March 2018?
My assignment was South Command Patrol. Shift was swings from 14:30 to midnight 30.
Did you have any kind of specialized training or assignment with the Sacramento Police Department?
No.
Prior to this interview, I provided you and your representative with the following items from SPD Case 18-82449. The CAD call printout, your body-worn camera footage, a video recording of your interview with homicide detectives on March 19, 2018, your statement to SPD Homicide Detective Griggs on March 19, 2018, an SSD Air Unit Star video, your round count form, an audio recording of radio traffic, a transcription of that radio traffic, an aerial photo of 29th Street, a copy of your post-training record, and a 2018 SPD CPT First Aid CPR Update course outline, a 3-page Law Enforcement Tactical Lifesaver course outline, a 90-page Tactical Lifesaver course student guide booklet, a 4-page crisis intervention behavioral health training course outline, an 8-page crisis intervention training expanded course outline, a copy of your range training qualification record, General Order 58002, revision date 5/16/2017, General Order 580.03, revision date 1/19/2018, General Order 580.12, revision date 10/9/2012, General Order 522.01, revision date 3/16/2018, General Order 522.02, revision date 5/16/2017, and General Order 525.07, revision date 4/26/2017, and a copy of the blue sheet complaint form relating to this investigation. Have you had a chance to review these?
I have.
Okay. For the record, these general orders were the current policies in place on March 18th of 2018. We're here to conduct an administrative interview with you regarding SPD case 18-82449, an officer-involved shooting which you were involved in on March 18th, 2018. Before we begin our interview here, it's been almost a year and 2 months since this incident occurred. There has been a large amount of video, audio, reports, press releases, media coverage, several investigations that have been made public regarding this incident. With that in mind, is there anything else that is not contained in Sacramento Police Report 18-82449 as your transcribed statement, your videotaped interview, that you have identified that needs to be added, clarified, or elaborated on?
Not to my knowledge.
Have you received training in emergency first aid and CPR?
I have.
Specifically, what kind of training and when?
Yep.
And your post-training record.
It's in here somewhere.
It says post.
There it is.
And again, I'll repeat the question again. Regarding emergency first aid and CPR, specifically, what kind of training did you take and when? That you see in there?
Looks like it's referred to as a web training on 5/25/2016. I know we went over first aid and CPR in the academy, and I believe there's been a couple updates during CPT over the last few years.
Okay. Was there also a course regarding tactical lifesaver that you had taken?
Yes.
What was the date of that?
Tactical Lifesaver, the 8-hour course, was on 10/21/2015.
Can you describe the Tactical Lifesaver course as to the material it covers, practicals you participate in, or lesson plans?
I don't remember every little detail. I know a lot of it involved gunshot wounds, how to field dress gunshot wounds, tourniquet, uses of tourniquets, tactical situations where medical aid is needed. As far as the scenarios and stuff like that, I don't remember exactly everything that was done.
Have you attended Crisis Intervention Training, or CIT?
Yes, I have.
And when was that? There should be 3 dates in there, I
Yeah,
think.
Crisis Intervention, the first one, 5/8/2015. Crisis Intervention Behavioral Health Training. Is it SB11? I'm not sure what the SB11 was for.
What's the date on that one?
February 27th, 2017. And then a Crisis Intervention Training on September 28th, 2017.
Can you describe what CIT is and what is taught in that course?
Essentially, it's responding to mental health crisis calls. Ways to intervene in somebody actively trying to kill themselves. Ways to deal with people who are planning on killing themselves. That's pretty much it. Mental health crisis and how to help these people when they're experiencing those types of situations.
Have you attended department training that talks about cover and concealment?
Yes.
And can you explain what that is?
Cover is essentially when you're behind a barrier that is impenetrable by projectiles. Concealment would be a position of hiding, essentially, where you're still vulnerable to a projectile as a threat, but you're in a position where the person shooting wouldn't necessarily be able to see you.
As a police officer, especially working patrol, how often would you utilize cover and concealment?
Often. Concealment especially. Concealment is arriving from a tactical position, arriving to a call, using a tactical position. That way, if there is a potential threat at the call you're arriving at, they don't necessarily see you as you're coming up to them. We use that in knocking on doors for any call. Like, you stand to the side. That's a position used to conceal where you're at when you're knocking on the door. Being a doorway is typically they call it the fatal funnel. Cover, we use cover a lot in the more high priority situations, or higher risk situations, I should say. Felony vehicle stops, we use the A pillar of the vehicle as a piece of cover from any threats that might be in the vehicle that you're stopping. Anytime there's a situation where somebody has a gun and we know about it, we use cover when we're dealing with that, whatever cover we may have, be it cars, trees, stronger parts of the house, the structure of the house, any type of situation like that.
Okay. Have you attended any kind of department training about containment or perimeters?
I believe some of that was covered in the academy. I don't necessarily remember, but as far as a perimeter class, no, I've never been on one. I can think of one that's been offered a couple times, but I've never had a chance to attend.
Have you been trained the concepts of contact arrest teams?
Yes.
And can you explain what that is?
A contact arrest team is when there's a situation arises that you actually need to place somebody under arrest, and they're in a position typically of disadvantage, where you have them on the ground, proned out or something like that. An arrest team is usually used where you have somebody who would be verbal commands, somebody who would be less lethal coverage, somebody who'd be lethal coverage, and somebody who would be hands-on. All different officers, or as many as you have available at the time, to move towards that person and make the arrest.
Okay. Have you been trained the concepts of cover officers?
Yes.
Can you explain what that is?
A cover officer is essentially somebody whose job is to watch you, the suspect, the surrounding areas for any potential threats that might arise while the primary officer is dealing with the subject.
Are the use of contact teams and cover officers a common practice in police work?
Sometimes every single call each day, so it's very common, yes.
And is that for officer safety reasons?
It is.
Have you received training relating to tactics and strategies for armed subjects?
Yes.
And have you utilized those tactics and strategies throughout your career?
Yes.
Is distance a key factor to officer safety?
Yes, it is.
Can you elaborate just a little bit on that?
Distance allows you time to react. In a potentially life-threatening situation where a subject might have a gun, distance is good for protecting yourself from being shot, because they don't necessarily, it's harder to hit a target from a distance than it is close up, in layman's terms. Mostly distance just gives you time to react.
Have you been involved in any officer-involved shootings other than this case?
No.
Would you agree that all Sacramento police officers have been trained and have some experience in the areas that we've talked about here?
Yes.
In referring to your range qualification record, could you please state your last qualification date prior to March 18th of 2018?
Is that going to be in here somewhere? Oh. It was range, right? It was going to be December 4th, 2017.
And this range qualification would have been with your personally owned Glock handgun, which you were equipped with on March 18th of 2018.
Yes.
Referring to your homicide, or to your statement that you gave to homicide investigators on March 19th, 2018, do you remember what videos you were allowed to watch prior to the interview with homicide detectives?
Yes. My body cam footage and Officer Mercadal's body cam footage.
And what type of equipment did you carry with you on that date of the shooting, if you recall?
Equipment as far as gear, what I had on me. Typical duty belt with taser, baton, OC spray, my firearm, magazines, radio, handcuffs, a tourniquet that was in my vest, my bulletproof vest, and pretty much it. There was a couple knives on my belt, but that was the equipment I had at the time.
Body worn camera?
Oh, body worn camera,
I
thank
was
you.
just going to ask you a
Yeah.
follow-up question. Were you wearing your department-issued body-worn camera?
Yes, it was.
And to your knowledge, was all of your equipment, including your body-worn camera, functioning properly at the beginning of your shift on March 18th of 2018?
Yes, it was.
Were you on duty March 18th, 2018 at 9:17 p.m.?
Yes, it was.
And was your identifier 1 Charles 54?
Yes.
You were a mid-watch patrol unit at this time, is that correct?
Yes.
And I think you kind of touched on it just a little bit earlier, but what hours, or what were your hours typically for that shift?
It's from 14:30 to midnight 30.
On March 18, 2018, 21:17 hours, did you respond to a call for service in the area of 29th Street regarding a car clout or car burglary in progress?
I did.
Would that type of call for service typically require a 1 or 2 officer response?
It's a two officer response.
And do you know the reason why that would be, as opposed to 1?
The majority of the calls that we go to is always a 2 officer response, just to cover officer for everything. This one in particular had a subject that was possibly in the area, and that would always be a 2 officer response
Is that for officer safety reasons?
for officer safety reasons.
Can you summarize some of the information about the call that you knew at the time when you were responding?
At the time of the call came out as a subject who had been breaking into cars. He was described as a male, approximately 6 foot tall, wearing a black hoodie and some sort of pants with a white design on them.
Were you driving a fully marked SPD patrol vehicle and in full SPD uniform?
I was.
Did another SPD patrol officer respond to this call as well with you?
Yes,
And who was that?
that was Officer Mercadal.
And what was his identifier?
1 Charles 57, I believe.
How long had you worked with Officer Mercadal leading up to this call,
In general, or
in general?
in general, Officer Mercadal rode with me when he was a Phase 1 trainee, just for like 1 day. I didn't see him for a while, and then he came to Team 29, the team I was on at that time. And it had been a couple of months, 3 months, I believe, since I started working with him. So in total, I'd say, 3 months and a couple of days.
And he was on the same patrol team with you, is that correct?
Yeah.
During your response to this call, did you and Officer Mercadal formulate any kind of plan as to how this call would be handled?
Not really. It was kind of on the fly, and it was started out as a typical, pretty easy to handle call where we both knew that what we were going to do was just go check the backyard that the complainant had mentioned the guy had ran into. And we were just going to check it and clear it and make sure nobody was there. If anything, we just kind of knew that's what the plan was. it's like, let's go check that backyard, I guess would have been our plan. I'm pretty sure we said something like that.
And is that, I'm sorry to interrupt, is that just based on your training and experience with these types of calls?
Yeah, from experience mostly with these types of calls, it's one of those things that we do. We just, don't need the formulated plan per se because there's not much to them. They're just, go clear the area and make sure that person isn't still in the backyard that he was last seen going into.
An SSD air unit Star responded to this call as well, correct?
Yes.
To your knowledge, was Star on scene for this call prior to your arrival?
I believe he was, yes.
Do you recall any information that Star had broadcasted regarding this call prior to your arrival?
Prior to our arrival, no, I don't remember. I believe he was just asking for more information from dispatch.
The CAD call indicates that at 21:34 hours you arrived on scene for this call. Is that correct?
Yes. 2134-09.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Do you recall who the primary officer on this call was?
I believe I was, but I'm not sure.
When you arrived on scene, you contacted caller complainant. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to refer to your body-worn camera footage here from this call. And looks like starting date timestamp 2018-03-19, and then TTOM 04-18-44Z for Zulu time. Does this appear to be your body-worn camera footage from the incident?
Yes.
At 04-18-59, you appear to contact Mr. here, is that correct?
Yes.
And to clarify, so 04-18 hours Zulu time would translate to 21-18 hours Pacific Standard Time. So as the CAD call indicates, you're on scene time at 21-31 hours, or I'm sorry, 34 hours. Would your actual physical on-scene time be at 21-18 hours?
Yes.
And I want to make sure I touched on that real quick on your 906 time earlier. I had said 21:34 for your 906. Was it 21:34 or 21:31?
It says en route 21:31 and on scene 21:34.
Okay. So as I was saying earlier here at 21:31 hours, it's not correct. It's 21:34 hours. Based on your training and experience, can you explain why that time discrepancy in the CAD call might be 21:34 hours versus 21:18 hours?
It could be that I either forgot to hit that I was on scene, the F12 button on the computer. It could be that there's some sort of delay in the CAD call, or for some reason dispatch marked me on scene later on again. Sometimes that changes when it shows, like if I were to hit en route as I'm going and hit on scene, like accidentally, and then hit en route again, it would show multiple times for each thing, and then hitting on scene again when I finally show up. I might have aired that I was on scene later on over the radio, thinking I didn't hit on scene. There's a lot of reasons that could have happened, but from my experience, it's usually something like that. It's usually forgetting to hit on scene when I show up, or missing the button completely with my finger. This particular case, I don't know exactly why there's a discrepancy there. I don't remember.
And we'll note for the record, your body-worn camera footage here has video but no audio for the first 30 seconds. Is that correct?
Yes.
Is that standard as to how the Axon brand SPD issued body-worn cameras function with no audio for the first 30 seconds?
Yeah, it's a pre-record Like it'll record the first 30 seconds before you activate the camera. So it'll show video, it just won't show sound during that time.
Okay. Let me hit play here again on video. So 041910, your audio activates here, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So roughly between 041859 and 041910, while you were apparently talking with Mr. with no audio, can you recall what he said to you?
From my best recollection, he was explaining to me that the subject had ran over like the north side fence of 29th Street. He was just kind of telling me like, hey, he went that way, he went that way. I do remember he kind of surprised me. I didn't expect to find the complainant standing in the street, and didn't realize he was that actual caller until he'd started speaking to me. And that's why there was no activation of the camera except when he was talking to me.
Of that portion of no audio while you're speaking with Mr. Do you recall if he gave you any information as to the suspect description?
I believe I asked him. I don't remember completely, but I believe I asked him if he had anything else, and he gave me the same description that he had given dispatch, which was the male in a hoodie with the pants with the white design on them.
And before we go on, just for the benefit of the record with the time, obviously we're talking about 041910 in Zulu time, not actual time.
Correct, which would translate,
Right.
And like I was saying earlier, that will translate, as you see on here, it says March 19th, but the incident's on the 18th. So for the Zulu time, that translates, it's actually 2119 as opposed to 0419, so it's a 7 hours subtraction, if that makes sense to you. Did Mr. direct you and Officer Mercadal towards a location where he last saw the suspect flee?
He pointed across the street to, and there was like the little side fence that's in this area would be, it's north-south, but it's that like piece of the fence that separates like the front yard from the backyard. He was pointing to that area and said that's where the subject went over.
And as this call is regarding vehicles being broke into, at this time, did you observe the vehicles that Mr. had claimed have been broken into?
I hadn't seen them yet. I know at one point after this part of the body cam footage, I did see, I think it might have been at this point, but I remember seeing like glass next to SUVs on the other side of the street. Now that I'm thinking about it, I actually can't remember when I actually saw that, but it was at some point in this call I saw that one, and then I saw another vehicle later on after all this. The concern here was some subject being in the backyard of somebody else's house, and then that homeowner not necessarily knowing if that person was back there or not.
In referring to page 16 of your statement to homicide detectives, you said, I could see broken glass from the side windows on the ground, or what I assumed was from the side windows on the ground. And then I observed another vehicle, I think in front of or around there there was like a wrought iron gate section of it. I don't know, probably about I assume that's 4 feet wide, by however tall, it was laying on the sidewalk. And there was broken glass out of the car that was parked next to the section of the fence, all over the ground right there. Does that sound accurate?
Yeah.
And based on the information you had at this point, can you describe what kind of crime, if any, you were investigating at this point, given the information that you had?
At the point in time that I saw this vehicle was actually after Starr, the sheriff's helicopter, had explained to us that he had observed somebody in the backyard of, I don't remember that address, but the one north of the scene. he had seen somebody in the backyard of that house breaking out the rear window. So when I saw this vehicle, it was as we were running towards where the subject was standing that the star was giving us the description of. So to answer the question, at this point in time,
Let's be specific as to which point in time you're.
okay, at the point in time that I saw this vehicle, it wasn't necessarily like a vandalism anymore or a trespass, in the property. At this point in time, it was more or less, at the very least, a burglary. But from training experience, I knew it was a Sunday night at approximately 9:30ish at night. Most likely somebody's home in the house that the guy was breaking the window. I was worried that that person that was breaking the window would actually be breaking in the home for some sort of, occupied dwelling robbery or any number of things that could have happened. I mean, I'm sure we'll have more questions on that later, but to clarify, this was just something I noticed as we were running to the directions that Star was putting out.
Gotcha. Later, not at this point in the body cam.
Not at this point, no.
And just a point of clarification, so when you're saying a burglary at the juncture where you're running to where Star has identified the subject, what kind of burglary are you referring to?
Are you talking about like a felony?
So
Yeah,
a residential?
A residential, occupied dwelling, burglary, robbery kind of thing. Multiple different options of what kind of burglary it could be. At the very least, it's a residential burglary.
Before you got to that point, though, when you had responded to this call, and based on what you had seen at the time, you were describing the broken glass and everything, what kind of crime were you investigating at that time, prior to Star directing you down the street?
Like, per the text of the call, it sounded at the very least a vehicle burglary, possibly vandalism at the very least. The lowest level crime at that point would have been a vandalism. Possibly a felony vandalism, depending on how much those windows cost.
Given the information that you had and the recent time element in this incident occurring, did you have concerns or reason to believe that the suspect was possibly still in the immediate area?
Say it again, sorry?
Given the information you had and the recent time element to this incident occurring, did you have concerns or reason to believe that the suspect was possibly still in the immediate area?
At this point in time.
Yes.
At the point in time that we're looking at on the body cam footage, correct?
Yes.
4:19:10 Zulu time.
Yeah, 4:19:10 Zulu time. Yes, we had reason to believe that he could possibly still be in the backyard of, because we weren't that far away when this call came out. It didn't take us long to get there. He did mention that the dogs had been barking and they had just stopped recently, and I believe that might be on the body cam footage. If not, it was something he did tell me, that they had just stopped barking moments before our arrival. So it was definitely a possibility that there was still a subject that had committed the vandalisms in the area.
And as you described, you were investigating a possible, you said vandalism. Was it possibly also an auto burglary or one or the other? Was there...
I mean, it could have been either or. I mean, we knew there was broken windows from vehicles, and a subject had broken those windows. The only difference between a vandalism and an auto burglary at that point is whether or not he took something out of the vehicles.
Okay. Is auto burglary defined under 459 of the California Penal Code as a crime in the state of California?
Yes, it is.
And then is vandalism defined under 594 of the California Penal Code as a crime in the state of California?
Yes, it is.
And both of these can be either a misdemeanor or felony depending on the circumstances, correct?
Yes.
I provided you with General Order 52201, Handling Mentally Ill Persons, revision date 3/16/2018. At your request here, I will read the highlighted portions aloud. Policy. It shall be the policy of the Sacramento Police Department that officers handling mentally ill persons proceed in a manner consistent with the safety and well-being of all persons involved. Officers are increasingly required to respond to and intervene on behalf of persons who are in mental health crisis. While officers are not expected to make mental health diagnosis, they are expected to recognize signs and symptoms that may suggest a mental illness, as well as behaviors that are indicative of mental health crisis. The goal is to use de-escalation techniques to maximize the likelihood of a safe outcome for officers, individuals, and the community. Procedure, Section C, use of force or physical restraints. Section 1, officers shall utilize only that amount of force necessary to secure the custody of the mentally ill person pursuant to 5150 of the Welfare Institutions Code. Officers shall handcuff all mentally ill persons taken into custody unless the age or physical condition of the person is such that the personal safety of the person and officer will clearly not be jeopardized. Do you acknowledge and understand that general order that I read?
Yes.
Okay. Did you have any information on this call or reason to believe up to this point that the outstanding suspect on this had a mental illness or was dealing with a mental crisis of any kind?
No, none at all.
Okay. Based on your training and experience, have individuals committed auto burglaries or vandalisms or other forms of crimes who, to the best of your knowledge, are not mentally ill or going through a mental crisis?
Yes, quite often.
Is it common practice for Sacramento police officers to arrest and book individuals who have committed a public offense, even if they are, or even if they have a mental illness or are dealing with a mental crisis?
Yes.
Were you equipped with a less lethal shotgun in your patrol vehicle on March 18, 2018?
Yes, it was.
Okay. Had you been issued one at that time?
I believe so.
Based on the information on the call that you had regarding the vandalism or auto burglary, would it have been routine to deploy and arm yourself with a less lethal shotgun system such as the beanbag shotgun, CED taser, or pepperball gun while investigating that call at the time?
At the time, no. There wouldn't have been any reason to deploy the beanbag shotgun. We didn't even know if there was a suspect actually still there. Likelihood that there might have been, but we didn't know.
Let me play on your video here.
Oh, so there was, okay. The dog's still going crazy back here, so nothing. Probably got Yeah, we'll be there.
Star Charles Medford. Our complainant last saw the guy jump the fence here. We are unaware if he went anywhere else from there. We want to check kind of last month there.
So 04/1956, what were you saying here?
As far as what I was saying, the star?
Generally of what you were saying here.
Essentially what I was doing was, one, updating star and where could be a possible area to look from this location. Just from my previous knowledge working the area for a while, I'd been down in Sector 5 for the majority of my career with SAC PD. I knew that there was like an empty field behind a church, basically right behind this house. So I figured that if he would have gone anywhere, the subject that broke the windows would have gone anywhere, he probably would have continued over the fence and into that area, towards Coral Gables. So I was telling the occupants of Star to kind of look in that area, and aside to that, I was also updating the call and anyone else who might have been listening to the call of what the complainant had told us. Which was basically that he saw that guy going that way, going west, towards 29th Street.
You and Officer Mercadal went to this location that had directed you to, correct?
Yes.
And once you and Mercadal went to this address, what did you do?
I knocked on the window, just because the light in the kitchen was on, trying to get the attention of any occupants that might be there. I mean, it looked like somebody was home with the lights on. Somebody came to the window. I never got her name, but took it she was the occupant of the home. Kind of just gave her a brief synopsis of what was going on, and told her that supposedly somebody had jumped into her backyard, and we asked for permission to just check the backyard and make sure nobody was back there.
And that resident allowed you and Officer Mercadal to check that backyard?
Yes.
After checking the backyard of this location at 29th Street with Officer Mercadal, did you find the subject in question?
No.
Okay, fast forward a bit here.
Can we do that?
Yeah.
Can I leave the car?
Now, at 04/25/16, after finishing your backyard search of this location at 29th Street, you and Officer Mercadal then returned back towards 29th Street, is that correct?
Yes.
1 Charles 5-4. Sorry about the dogs. Asking if you still got eyes on my car.
At 04/25/40, you and Officer Mercadal appear to begin running in a southbound direction on 29th Street, correct?
Yes.
And can you explain why?
That was when the Ford, can't think of the name right now, but the TFO, Tactical Flight Observer, in the Star had advised us that they had watched somebody in the backyard of, I don't remember that address, but one house north of the scene. They had advised that they had just watched somebody use I believe I called it a crowbar in my interview, but they called it some sort of toolbar, to break out the rear sliding glass door window of that address, whatever it may be, of the house north of the final scene. So it might have been or something like that.
Are you hearing these updates from Star over your portable radio?
Yes.
Now, there doesn't appear to be any kind of audible traffic or audible radio traffic on your body-worn camera footage here, is that correct?
Yes.
Can you explain why that is?
Because I use a tactical earpiece. It's a microphone that essentially just goes right into my ear. That way only I can hear what's on the radio versus everyone around me hearing the same kind of updates. It's for officer safety, tactical situations, just that way if you're, need to run somebody over the radio and they end up having a warrant, that way they're not advised that we now know that they have a warrant. Any other situation like that where you just generally don't want people to hear what's on the radio. That's why we use the earpieces.
In referring to page 10 of your statement to homicide investigators, you stated, I don't recall him giving an address at the time, but he said that it looked like the individual was attempting to break into that house and that he had a crowbar in his hand. And Star gave the update about the breaking of the glass with a crowbar. Is that correct?
Yes.
So in referencing the radio audio of page 4 of the transcript, and you don't need to really jump behind there between the pages unless you want to. The crowbar, you had mentioned it earlier here. You said Star had mentioned that the subject had what they thought was a toolbar.
Yes.
Is that correct? Okay. Was this the information about the crowbar that you were referring to in your statement?
Yeah.
Based on your training and experience, would breaking glass, such as a window, typically require a hard object or some kind of force?
Yes. It's pretty tough glass in those sliding glass doors.
On page 16 of your statement, you described a wrought iron gate section about 4 wide. Is that 4 feet wide?
I believe so. That might have been a transcription error where they didn't catch me saying 4 feet, but I was, 4 feet.
Okay. And you said you had noticed this on the sidewalk near one of the damaged vehicles. So confirming that you're describing like a 4 foot wide metal gate of some kind.
Yes.
Okay. And do you recall when you first saw that object?
As we were running, like as you can see in the body cam footage at 4:25, 40 is the time. As we continue to run southbound is when I observed that car with the broken glass and the gate next to it.
Did it appear that with this new information from Star, in addition to you investigating either a car burglary or vandalism on this call, that the same suspect had possibly committed or was attempting to commit a residential burglary or home invasion as well?
That was exactly what my concern was. It upped the level of, I guess, danger, upped the level of necessity to find out who the person was and stop them from doing whatever they were doing. Because of those concerns, it changed it from being a simple vandalism or car burglary to something much more extreme, where there was definitely more danger involved to the residents of that neighborhood and potentially even us. If somebody's willing to break into an occupied house, then who knows what else they might be able to do.
Residential burglary and or home invasion are both felonies in the state of California as defined under 459 and 212.5 of the California Penal Code, respectively, correct?
Yes.
And did these additional updates give you any extra considerations as to your mindset at all?
Can you clarify what you mean by my mindset? It's
With-
kind of referring back to what I was just saying.
Yeah, and you did kind of touch on that. So is these updates coming out that you're thinking either that you have a residential burglary or home invasion, are these updates that are coming out changing or affecting your mindset as to your approach of handling this call?
Yeah, it became much more of a necessity to find this person and prevent him from doing anything else that he might be planning on doing, be it a home invasion or a residential burglary, or again, who knows, like I talked about earlier, my biggest concern was that it was a Sunday night at roughly 9:30 at night. Most people in that neighborhood are going to be home. It's not like it's a weekday daytime when people are at work. You know, if somebody is going around breaking car windows and then now is trying to break into a home that's most likely occupied, it's not just the home invasion thing, it's what might happen after the home invasion. And we would be at a huge tactical disadvantage if we had to respond to somebody now inside with any hostages or doing God knows what to the person's side of the home. We need to be able to find that person before he actually goes into a house.
I think you just touched on this when you said what may happen after the home invasion. Can you just be a little bit more specific as to what you're referring to?
Well, there's a whole number of things that could happen after somebody breaks into an occupied house. I mean, something as, you know, hey, I'm going to take your stuff, sit there. I mean, that person's victimized by that, but it could be all the way up to a homicide, depending on why he's breaking into the house. It could be a hostage situation. It could be any number of just extremely dangerous things to a community member, somebody who's necessarily just sitting there minding their own business. Not really sure what else I can articulate except for the fact that it changes the scope of the call immensely from something that's relatively minor to something that's extremely dangerous.
Do you recall what information Starr was advising about the direction of travel and location of the suspect at this time? As we're referring on your body-worn camera footage at 042540.
Yeah, at this time, I call it more like a time frame as we're running southbound here. He's giving updates and he says that he broke the window and then he was running south. There were more updates later. I don't remember exactly time frame wise in relation to when in the body cam footage it is, if that makes any sense.
I can play again here. It's 042626. Did Officer Mercadal say something to you here?
Now I know that he did. At that time, I just heard him yelling. I wasn't exactly sure what was being said.
And now in hindsight of what you know now, what was it that Officer Mercadal said to you?
I know from seeing the videos, I know that he called my name. And I do know, and I knew at the time, I should say, I did know at the time he was yelling at somebody else, not me, which from experience, training, all that stuff, I knew that he was most likely yelling at the suspect. Just by tone of voice, how loud he was, the fact he wasn't yelling at me, there really wasn't much else that, what we had known from Star giving updates that in one of these driveways, I was a little confused of where I was at this point, but in one of the driveways, the subject was actually coming out towards 29th Street. So I started running back because I assumed that Officer Mercadal was now yelling at the suspect.
So at 042631 here, you begin to run northbound on 29th Street here, and I think you kind of touched on it, but can you just again indicate why you began running back northbound on 29th?
Because as I was saying earlier, it was pretty obvious that Officer Mercadal had found the suspect that we were looking for, based on what Star had been telling us over the radio, which can't be heard on my body cam because of the earpiece, because of the tone and the volume of Officer Mercadal's commands. It's pretty obvious that Officer Mercadal had contacted the suspect at that time.
Stop!
042635. So what does Officer Mercadal appear to do here?
Issue commands to the person that was running away from him. He's yelling, telling him to show him his hands and telling him to stop. It appears that I never actually saw the suspect. Up to this point, I hadn't seen the suspect. I'm pretty sure since Terrence was running that the suspect was running, so that would make sense why Officer Mercadal was giving him the commands that he was giving him, telling him to stop, show his hands, that kind of stuff.
Were you under the impression that Officer Mercadal was in foot pursuit of the suspect in question at this time?
I guess technically, yes, that would be a foot pursuit, very short foot pursuit, but I assume so, that he was chasing the suspect at that time because the suspect was running from him, and also Star had been giving updates about the direction of travel of the suspect, so he was overhead falling. So I'd never really thought about it as a foot pursuit before, but just based on the short distance, but technically, yes, it was one.
Was Officer Mercadal verbalizing commands towards the subject he was pursuing?
Yes.
And can you recall what those were?
It's show your hands, stop. I don't remember every little thing that he said, but I think that was pretty much the gist of it.
Are foot pursuits inherently dangerous for police officers?
Yes.
Okay, can you explain why?
You have many things to contend with. Not only do you have the suspect, it's not like you chase a suspect and they stay in a straight line. You have corners, you have things that you have to go around, and you really never know what's on the other side of that corner when you get to them. That's why every law enforcement agency I've been with, including the Border Patrol, taught when you're running after somebody, you stop or slow at corners to get an idea of what's on the other side of that corner before you go past it. Then just the ancillary things that you have to deal with, other people, vehicle traffic, any number of things that could possibly be an issue. You can't just run out in the middle of the street chasing somebody because you might get hit by a car. So yeah, in general, foot pursuits can be inherently dangerous.
Based on your training and experience, would it be an accepted practice by Sacramento police officers to not assist or join police officers who are involved in a foot pursuit?
No, that'd be a horrible, like basically not helping out another officer running or chasing somebody. Yeah, that would be a horrible idea because of how dangerous they could be, and it also helps to apprehend the person that you're chasing to have more people there helping.
And did you see the suspect at the time Officer Mercadal called out to you and began to give chase? I think you said earlier you didn't see him. Is that
No,
correct?
I hadn't seen him. Even up to this point, I hadn't seen him. I was just following Officer Mercadal. Or trying to catch up to him, I should say.
You guys want to take a little break? We're almost an hour in.
I'm good.
Let's take a 5 minutes. if we could.
Okay.
Thanks.
And we're breaking at 0950. Okay, we are back on at 10:01. All right. Play your body camera here again. And 042640. At what point did you draw your firearm? Do you recall?
Honestly, no. I don't remember when I drew it out. I would assume it was probably out around here because that's just my general, what's the word I'm looking for? My typical maneuver in a foot pursuit, I want to have it at least at the low ready, meaning by my side, unless I can actually see what I'm chasing or going at and know it's not, there's no gun or anything like that in there. And I don't typically draw it on every foot pursuit, but in a situation like this, it's dark, can't see the person we're running after. All we have is what Star is telling us in our earpieces at the moment, and I don't know what Officer Mercadal had seen up to that point. I'm going to have my gun out and just ready if need be. That said, though, I don't know if I actually did at this point in time.
When you eventually did, you kind of described some of it. Again, what was your reason for drawing your firearm when you did draw it? Can you recall?
The inherent dangers that I talked about before in foot pursuits and when you're chasing somebody, the fact that you can see in this section of the body camera footage that we are coming up on the corner of a house, and there's, aside from what Star is putting out, that there's somebody running in that backyard, because at this point in time Star was still telling us he was running southbound. There's a huge unknown right there. There's a corner, there's a yard, and then there's nothing else. We don't know what is around that corner. So it's advantageous to actually have your gun out and ready just in case there is that immediate threat around the corner.
Did you ever consider drawing or arming yourself with any kind of less lethal weapons, such as your conducted energy device or anything else, as opposed to your firearm at this point?
I didn't consider it, and I wouldn't consider it, not at this point. Like I said, there's a time and a place to use those less lethal options, but when there is a huge unknown of what's around the corner, is neither the time nor the place to use less lethal weapons. Those are when you have the ability to assess the situation that's developed in front of you, is when you can use those less lethal options. At this point in time, there was no chance, nor was there an ability to assess what was around the corner. I mean, you can't see it, can't read the future, can't do anything like that. That's just a complete unknown.
Did you know who the suspect was at all at this point?
No, not at all. I still hadn't seen the suspect.
Before we move on to the next portion, in terms of when you made the decision to draw your firearm, I know you can't recall exactly when you did here, but just generally speaking, I think you said your certain maneuver or your tactic, is that based on your training with the Sacramento Police Department?
With the Sacramento Police Department and with the U.S. Border Patrol. You don't go into a complete unknown situation where something might be dangerous without having your firearm at the ready.
And is that the same in terms of you just articulated not using a less lethal option at that time? Is that based on your training and experience with the Border Patrol and Sacramento Police Department?
Yes. Say for most people in law enforcement too, that would be not just training, but also common sense over time from experience.
Zero 042641. Can you describe what happens here?
From my best recollection, what I recall, this is when we're hitting the corner of the house. Officer Mercadal had gone further out into the yard, had started to go out into the yard. I think at this point in time, what you can see on my body camera is, on the footage, is Officer Mercadal seeing that the suspect, who ended up being Mr. Clark, was actually still in the backyard posted up. We had been told by Star, literally like almost as we were hitting this corner, that the suspect was still running. So this moment, I believe, is when Officer Mercadal probably notices that Stefan Clark is still in the backyard and standing facing us.
Do you remember what Star told you about him running in terms of direction of travel and what you were thinking at the time?
Essentially, well, not essentially, but Star had told us that the suspect was still running southbound, and I remember him, Deputy Gomez, I believe, was a TFO on Star. That Deputy Gomez was talking now about getting perimeters set up because he was going to be running into that empty field that I had talked about earlier by the church near Coral Gables Court. But at this point in time, we were under the impression that the individual was still running southbound through the yard.
So I'll stop again here. At 042642, it appears that you hold a position at the northwest corner of 29th Street. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Would this be considered a position of cover?
Yes.
You and Officer Mercadal appear to focus on the south backyard area here, correct?
Yes.
You kind of touched on it earlier, but just to reiterate here, were you and Officer Mercadal, were you directed by the air unit over the radio as to the location of the suspect at this point? Were you directed basically to where the suspect was based on what Star was telling you? Or was it more that you were following Officer Mercadal?
Do you mean as far as directed to... Like I said before, Star was telling us that he was still running southbound through the yard. We didn't have any indication that he would be actually standing there facing us as we hit the corner. So I guess it would be a combination of following Officer Mercadal, also following Star's directions to the suspect that was running in the yard.
Okay.
But
So,
it's...
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, as far as his position in the body camera footage right here, no, we had no indication that he would be exactly right there.
Were you under the impression that this subject that Officer Mercadal had spotted was likely the same subject that the air unit was describing and directing you towards?
Based on the time frame from Officer Mercadal spotting him in the yard to chasing back there, plus the updates from Star, yeah, I had no question that it was the same person. There was no indication of anyone else being in that yard.
Did you yell out any commands at this point to the suspect?
No, I didn't.
Did you verbally identify yourself as a police officer to this point?
No.
And what's the reason that you can explain? Why not?
Personally, I didn't feel like I had even a chance to. I mean, everything unfolded so quickly. So, I mean, as I mentioned in my homicide interview, it was instantaneous. Everything was just just kind of happened. I didn't know everything that Officer Mercadal had yelled in his initial commands. Like I said, I had just heard him yelling. But up to this point, and even after the brief moments after, I never felt like I had an actual opportunity. That said, I guess it would be kind of conjuncture, even hindsight. I don't believe there was any question or not of who we were. I mean, Officer Mercadal had been mere feet away from Stefan in the driveway. Combination with the helicopter flying overhead, shining the spotlight down. I mean, there's not really a whole lot of question about who we could have been at that point in time. So, but again, that's not something that entered my mind at this particular time. This particular time, I just didn't feel like I had any time whatsoever to issue any commands.
On page 11 of your statement to homicide investigators, you described, due to the subject breaking the glass, thinking maybe he's trying to break into the house, what completely unknown what he had in his hands when Officer Mercadal followed him into the backyard. What was the importance here of what you were describing here about the subject breaking glass and that it was unknown what he had in his hands?
So when I was talking about the breaking of the glass that Deputy Gomez had mentioned from STAR, that was referring to our mindset of, or my mindset on what may have happened after breaking into the glass. Like, was he going to commit the home invasion, or was he going to commit the burglary, or was he going to do the same thing and try and get into this particular house? That was referring to my mindset. When I was talking about what was in his hands, like if you go back in my statement, I'm talking about I had already observed him in that isosceles shooting position. The shooting position with the two hands out in front of you with the chest and body facing forward, which I recognize as the shooting position, firing position. And when I was saying like what was unknown is like I knew he had something in his hands. It was just unknown what exactly was in his hands. This statement didn't have anything to do with like what he used to break the window. This was just his intent, his mindset of what he was going to do after breaking into these houses, and then his positioning and noticing that there was something in his hands that he was pointing at us.
On page 11 of your statement, you said, as we hit the corner, the northwest corner of the house in the backyard, I observed the suspect standing approximately what I thought was around 15 to 20 feet away. Is that correct?
Yes.
Go back to your body cam here.
Show me your gun!
042643. What does Officer Mercadal say here?
He says gun.
Does he say anything else?
Show me your hands, gun.
On page 11 of your statement and leading into page 12 to homicide investigators, you described the suspect had punched out into an isosceles position that you observed the suspect make. Can you further describe that?
Kind of like what I was just saying, the isosceles position is I think it's almost relatively every single law enforcement agency that I'm aware of teaches this shooting stance. It's the stable platform where your shoulders are square to your target your hands are what I meant by punched out or pushed out in front of you. They are forming a triangle. Your arms are forming a triangle with your shoulders. Your gun is held at the same plane as your eye level, is held up at eye level, and you're slightly bent forward, hands out completely in front of you. And like I said, training experience from both the Border Patrol and here at SAC PD, that's a firing stance.
You described in your statement that an isosceles position would be consistent with a shooting or firing position that someone would take from your firearms and range training experience, correct?
Yes.
And on page 12 of your statement, you said, I recognize that as a position somebody shoots from, correct?
Yes.
Can you think of any other practical reasons for someone to take a stance like that towards a police officer aside from pointing and shooting a firearm at them?
I can't think of any reason why anybody would stand in that position other than if they were going to fire a gun. Like, even if they weren't pointing it at a police officer, there's no practical reason why anybody would stand that way.
You also described in your statement on page 12, I could see that there was something in the suspect's hands. I wasn't able to make it out. I saw something, reflection of what I thought was a metal object in his hand from the reflection of our lights. Because the backyard was really dark, it was hard to see, making out anything clear. All I saw was a subject in dark clothing standing in that position with his hands punched out with something in his hands. Mercadal yelled gun. Out of instinct, I ducked behind the corner real quick, cover. Came back around, and to get an idea what was going on, saw the suspect still standing in that position, still punched out at us. I honestly was really surprised that I hadn't heard gunshots yet. And to protect myself and Terrence, I fired what I thought was 5 rounds on scene. And then on page 13, you had said, I was surprised he hadn't started firing at us. Does that all sound accurate?
Yes.
Okay. Can you explain what you meant in that you were surprised he hadn't started firing?
So, going back to the long paragraph of what I was talking about, when Officer Mercadal first yelled gun, that's when I instinctively took the cover position behind the corner of the house. I came out with my gun on target, and I stuck my head out and was looking at Stefan, or Mr. Clark, what felt for like a really long time. That's when I said I came back around to get a better idea of what was going on. But I looked to try and figure out what was in his hands, and that's when he was still punched out. And at the time of the interview and immediately after the event, I remember thinking, wow, I stuck my head out there for a really freaking long time. And the whole time, it was like an ambush scenario. He had the drop on us the entire time, meaning that we came around that corner and were exposed. He was already in that position. When we took cover and I stuck my head out there, it felt much longer than it actually was, but my head was exposed. And I never really understood at the time. I didn't understand why he had not started shooting at us, because he had ample opportunity to do so. Or it felt like ample opportunity to do so. So when I was talking about, I was surprised he hadn't started firing on us. Everything that we did, and exposing ourselves, coming around the corner, believing he was still running, but we were coming around the corner. He had opportunity after opportunity to actually start shooting, and it just, it's pretty self-explanatory after that. I was just surprised that hadn't happened. Like, I didn't know what kind of luck we had or what, but I was surprised that he hadn't started shooting.
And did that make you feel that him shooting at you was imminent?
Oh yeah. I mean, that was the thought that was in my head. I took the time to try and figure out what was in his hands, but I didn't. I mean, come to find out after watching the body camera footage and stuff, it wasn't really that long before I started firing, and that was because, in my opinion, there was that imminent threat at the time, based on all the other factors, his position and whatnot.
On page 13 of your statement, you said, I really felt like that was a gun. His position, like I said, was something I recognized as a firing position from all the training and all the firearms training that I've been through in the last 9 years, correct?
Yes.
I'll play your body cam here.
Show me your hands! Gun!
At 042647, what does Officer Mercadal say here?
It says, show me your hands, and then he repeats gun 3 times.
And at this point, you shoot at the suspect, correct?
Yes.
Did you give any commands to the suspect to drop what he was holding?
No.
Why not?
I didn't feel like there was time. Like I just kind of rambled on about a second ago. I felt like he had the drop on us. Like I didn't feel like there was any time to do anything other than fire at that point. This is a section that I was talking about. Like when Officer Mercadal yells gun the first time, I hit the cover point, and I'm actually already looking at this point, trying to determine what was in Stefan's hands prior to Officer Mercadal yelling gun 3 times. So that's kind of the time period where I had my head exposed trying to figure it out. When I refer later in my statement about like the reflection that I saw and all that stuff, that was when I saw all that stuff and felt like that was definitely a gun in his hands. So at that point I felt like it was just, if I waited any longer I was going to he was going to start shooting. If I waited any longer he was going to start shooting.
Based on your recollection, can you estimate about how far away the suspect was from you and Officer Mercadal when you fired?
At that point, I never remembered him moving, so I'd still say he was probably 15 to 20 feet. But
15 to 20 feet?
Yeah, I don't completely remember.
On page 18 of your statement, you indicated that you did not hear the suspect say a single thing during this incident, correct?
I didn't.
Did not?
I did not hear him say anything.
I provided you with General Orders 58002, use of force, revision date 5/16/17, and 58003, discharge of firearm, revision date 1/19/18. I will read aloud the highlighted portions here if you want to follow along. Under 58002, policy. It shall be the policy of the Sacramento Police Department that officers value and preserve the sanctity of human life at all times. Officers shall use only that amount of force necessary under the circumstances presented that the officer reasonably believes is required. Officers are expected to use de-escalation techniques when reasonably possible and without increasing the risk of harm to officers or others in an effort to reduce or eliminate the use of force. When using force, officers shall continuously reassess the perceived threat to select the reasonable use of force response. When making use of force decisions, officers should be mindful that subjects may be physically or mentally incapable of responding to police commands due to a variety of circumstances, including but not limited to alcohol or drugs, mental impairment, medical conditions, or language and cultural barriers. Under Procedure A, definitions, 9, de-escalation. Employing techniques to stabilize a situation to decrease the likelihood of the need to use force and to increase the likelihood of voluntary compliance. B, general, subsection 1. Force shall be used in compliance with Penal Code section 835A, which states, any peace officer who has reasonable cause to believe that the person to be arrested has committed a public offense may use reasonable force to effect the arrest, to prevent escape, or to overcome resistance. A peace officer who makes or attempts to make an arrest need not retreat or desist from his efforts by reason of the resistance or threatened resistance of the person being arrested. Nor shall such officer be deemed an aggressor or lose his right to self-defense by the use of reasonable force to effect the arrest or to prevent escape or to overcome resistance. 2. Officers may use deadly force if, under the circumstances, the officer reasonably believes that the suspect poses a threat of death or serious bodily injury, either to the officer or to others. 5. When reasonable under the totality of the circumstances and where it may be accomplished without increasing the risk of harm to officers or others, officers should attempt to de-escalate situations. De-escalation techniques include, but are not limited to, gathering information about the incident, assessing risks, gathering resources, personnel and equipment, using time, distance, cover, using crisis intervention techniques, and communicating and coordinating a response. Refer to GO 522.02, Emergency Care for Individuals under Police Care or Control when rendering emergency medical treatment or summoning medical assistance. Under C, Mandatory Reporting Procedure. D. When the use of force has resulted in an injury, officers shall comply with the provisions in GO 522.02, Emergency Medical Care for Arrestees. If the individual is not arrested or will be released with a citation, officers should offer to call for an ambulance or assist in arranging transportation to an authorized medical facility. And do you understand that general order that I read aloud there?
Yes, I do.
Okay. 58003, discharge of firearm. Policy. It shall be the policy of the Sacramento Police Department that officers continually evaluate all reasonable and readily available force options to apprehend or subdue an individual before resorting to the greater use of physical and or deadly force. A thorough investigation will be conducted on all incidents resulting in firearm discharges by department employees. Procedure A, General. Subsection 1. Officers may discharge a firearm in the performance of their official duty. Section A, in the necessary defense of themselves or in the defense of another person when the officer reasonably believes that an imminent danger of death or serious bodily injury exists. Section B, to effect an arrest, prevent escape, or recapture an escapee when the officer reasonably believes the suspect to be arrested poses an immediate threat to cause death or serious bodily injury if apprehension is delayed. Section 3, a verbal warning should precede the use of deadly force where feasible and when it will not increase the risk of harm to officers or others. 4. Justification for the use of deadly force shall be limited to what reasonably appears to be the facts known or perceived by the officer at the time. Facts unknown to an officer shall not be considered in later determining whether the shooting was justified. 5. Nothing in any firearms procedure shall preclude the drawing of the officer's firearm during the course of an arrest or investigation, or when an officer reasonably believes it necessary for the safety of the officer or the safety of another. Section 7. Refer to GO 522.02, Emergency Care for Individuals under Police Care or Control when rendering emergency medical treatment or summoning medical assistance. Do you understand that general order that I have read?
I do.
Now, as far as your justification for discharging your firearm use of force, would you like to stipulate that your voluntary statement provided to investigators on March 19, 2018 articulates your justification to discharging your firearm?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Is there anything you would like to add or clarify from that statement as to your justification for the use of force, specifically discharging your firearm?
No.
In your opinion, do you feel you complied with or violated General Order 58002?
Complied with.
You complied with it?
Yes.
In your opinion, do you feel you complied with or violated General Order 58003, discharge of firearm?
I complied with that one as well.
If you could articulate why, in your opinion, you feel you complied with those general orders, citing any possible sections in those orders that you feel would apply.
And we're just to be clear, we are articulating certain policy sections that apply, but not the factual circumstances that are already articulated in the homicide investigation?
Correct. We're not going for the articulation as to why you discharge your firearm. It's just as to why you feel that you complied with those two general orders that I read.
Thank you.
To answer the question, do you mind if I just refer to the part that's actually written in the policy?
Sure.
Okay. So, just in the policy statement alone, officers shall use only the amount of force necessary under the circumstances presented that the officer reasonably believes is required. In this scenario, without going into detail, I reasonably believe that he was pointing a firearm at us and a threat was imminent. Officers are expected to use de-escalation techniques. There was no time. Again, an imminent, instantaneous situation that developed where there was no time to do anything to de-escalate the situation. When making use of force decisions, officers should be mindful that subjects may be physically or mentally incapable of responding to police commands. That goes back to there was no time to de-escalate, so there's no time, nor did we have any indication that a subject might be experiencing a mental health crisis or under the influence of different narcotics or alcohol. We had no indication that that was happening here, nor did we have time to figure that out. That goes with the rest of the policy statement, talking about, language, cultural barriers. There was no time at all to figure any of that stuff. Again, the procedure A9, employee techniques to stabilize the situation, de-escalation. No time to do that. The force being in compliance with Penal Code Section 835A. Again, as perceived at the time of the event, we necessarily needed to use deadly force based on the circumstances that are outlined in the homicide investigation. Yeah.
Are there any other excerpts that you want to pull in?
I'm trying to be as thorough as possible.
No,
If
no,
I
it's
was
okay.
going overboard, I apologize.
Let me touch on something under the 5803 one. So as stated at the bottom of your page, page 18 of your statement.
It's over here somewhere.
You stated that you did not give the suspect any commands, correct?
Yes. So,
Yeah. So in reference with 5803 about a verbal warning. So as far as you not giving the suspect any commands, can you explain why not? Yeah, so I'm sorry.
the verbal warning should precede the use of deadly force where feasible. I never had a chance to give a verbal command. It goes back to the imminent, instantaneous situation unfolding, or how I felt it was that way. Had I made a command or taken the time to do some sort of command, I felt like that would have been time allotted to Mr. Clark to actually shoot us. I mean, again, it was instantaneous. There was no time to do that to prevent, or there was no time to issue a command like that because the threat was to our lives was imminent. I guess is a better way of putting it, articulating it.
Just prior to your firing, you appeared to come around the corner, then retreat back, and then peek back around the corner and engage the suspect. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Was there a reason you decided to engage the suspect here as opposed to any other options like fully retreating from your position or anything like that?
We had already we had already been advised that he had at least attempted to break into a home. And now he was in another yard. Come to find out, it was his grandmother's yard, but at the time we didn't know it. There was no way of knowing that, but he was in another yard, and retreating from that situation would have allowed him to do whatever he needed to do to get into that home and potentially victimize brutally or whatever in some form or fashion the occupants of that home. That's the way we perceived that situation. We had no idea that it was actually where he stayed on occasion. So if we would have came back out of that driveway and left him to his own accord, who knows what would have happened. It could have been that, like I said, the same situation with the house that was just north of us at this time. The home invasion, the residential burglary, the inherent risks that come with that, and what would have happened to the victims. Would they have been seriously hurt, killed? We didn't have any clue other than the fact that we couldn't give him that opportunity at that time. Especially now that we thought he had a firearm, and had we retreated and let him break into that house, that would have been extremely bad for the occupants of the house. I mean, now that would have changed the dynamic of the call immensely, and it's more than likely the occupants of the house would have been seriously injured, if not killed.
Play your body camera. So 042653, gunfire by you and Officer Mercadal appears to cease at this point, correct?
Yes.
Referencing from your crisis intervention training, do you think it would have been practical or safe for you to try and evaluate if the suspect was experiencing mental crisis or illness or under the influence of anything, given the timing of what you and Officer Mercadal were faced with during your initial pursuit and confrontation with the suspect?
I'm sure I talked about this already, but yeah, there was absolutely no time to perceive or evaluate Mr. Clark for any of that stuff. There's just no time for it.
Do you believe if doing so would have potentially increased the risk of harm to yourself or the occupants of that residence?
Easily, we would have allowed him more time to, either break into the house or shoot at us. Again, perceiving the subject with a gun at this point in time.
5-7 shots fired, subject down.
What does Officer Mercadal say there?
He says 5-7, which is his unit identifier. Says shots fired and the suspect's down, or subject's down. Couldn't tell.
Show me your hands! Let's see your hands!
042659, what are you and Officer Mercadal saying here?
Well, we're yelling at the suspect, Mr. Clark, to show us his hands.
.570 down. No movement. We're going to need additional units. Come in from the west to east of the yard.
042714, what is Officer Mercadal saying here?
He's saying verbatim, sorry, or
No, I mean, what you
saying
can recall, yeah.
he's on the radio giving an update of what's happened. He did say shots fired again, and he's trying to direct other units to the area. I think maybe based on adrenaline or what, but he gave them the wrong directions. But he's trying to direct the units that are just automatically going to come with a shots fired call into the backyard of this house from a safe area.
Let's see your hands!
042716, is that you saying, let's see your hands?
Yeah, I'm still trying to elicit a response from the subject that I can see on the ground. Right now his back is towards us, And from my perspective, I can't see either one of his hands.
You alright? You hit? Yeah, I'm good.
What's being said here between you and Officer Mercadal?
We're checking on each other to see if anybody he asked me if I was hit, and I told him that I was good. And then I think right after this, I kind of asked him if he was alright himself.
What does that mean when you say, are you hit? You're checking.
Are you shot? Have you been hit by a bullet?
He was still pointing when I saw it.
I'm sorry. Let me play that back.
He was still pointing when I saw it again. You alright?
What is it that you said right there? So 04, 27, and 27.
He was still pointing, and I think it continued to say as I poked my head back around the corner, he was still pointing at us or something like that. I don't remember exactly what my words were, but I was referring to first time Officer Mercadal yelled gun, and I saw Stefan in the shooting position, and then I hit the cover. I came back around. He was still pointing whatever it was at us, like it was a gun. That's what I was referring to. So the second time I came around, after I took cover and came back around with my head, he was still pointing, well, what ended up being the cell phone at us like a gun.
When I saw it again, you alright, dude? Yeah, I'm alright. I don't think I'm hit or anything.
What are you and Officer Mercadal saying to each other here?
Just asking him if he was good this time. He said, I don't think I'm hit or anything. He had asked me first if I was good, and I said I was, and then we had that little brief discussion about what I saw, and then now I was just asking to make sure he was alright. As you can hear in the body cam footage, he's breathing quite heavily and is pretty freaked out by the whole situation, pretty excited.
Officer Mercadal.
Officer Mercadal. What did I say?
Oh, you said he. I was just clarifying.
Yeah, Officer Mercadal. Sorry.
On page 17 of your statement, you described the backyard as it was non-existent except for my flashlight and Terrence's light, correct?
The lighting, yes.
So, can you describe for me the overall setting here of where the downed suspect was at the time, as far as backyard condition, vegetation, any obstructions, and again, I know you touched on lighting already, but can you describe those things?
Yeah, aside from the light from Terrence's tack light, I believe he had a tack light. I know it was my flashlight because my tack light stopped working in the backyard of the other house. Aside from that light, there was absolute zero light. If we weren't pointing our flashlights at a certain area, the lighting was completely non-existent. I don't even recall there being much of a moon that night. It was really dark out there. The grass, as you can see in the body cam footage, was extremely long. I knew there was this brick structure right here that you can see in the body cam footage. It might have been like an outdoor barbecue pit or something, or a fire pit of some sort. I'm not really sure what it was, but you can't see him in my body cam footage, but just on the other side of the corner, I believe it might have been either parallel with the fire pit or slightly in front. Stefan Clark is laying on his right side. Hands, from what I can tell, are in front of him. And he's got his back towards us. So the grass covers him a little bit from my perspective. That's really all I kind of remember about actually what I saw at that time. I just remember seeing his back, not being able to see his hands, and seeing that he was kind of near the patio area, the cement section in the backyard.
On page 18 of your statement, you said, I could see what our light was on, which at that point was pretty much the suspect. I saw mostly his midsection, like I'd say from his mid-stomach down to like his knees. And it was really dark. I couldn't see. Is that correct?
Yes.
And what about the suspect himself? You kind of touched on just earlier. Were you able to clearly see that he was no longer apparently armed or a threat to you or Officer Mercadal at this time?
At this time, after the shooting, no.
Okay.
No. Couldn't see. All I could see really was his back and shoulders and back of his head. There wasn't much else that I remember being able to see.
I got him at gunpoint, dude. You do a tactical reload, okay?
042742. What did you say here?
I told Officer Mercadal that I would hold the suspect at gunpoint and advise him to do a tactical reload, essentially a quick reload of the magazine into his firearm.
Okay. And why was that said?
That was said. There was two reasons why I said that. In previous training, it was something in the border patrol that was taught pretty heavily. Was in a situation like this, you need some minor task that's kind of muscle memory. It kind of helps you calm down. So obviously both of us were really excited at this point in time. Really, not excited is the wrong word, but pumped with adrenaline, breathing hard. You can hear Officer Mercadal breathing extremely hard. And I wanted to give him a task to just focus on, to take his mind off of everything else, and it was just a tangible task that he could do to kind of help calm him down. So there was that aspect of it, but then there was also the aspect that we did not know that Stefan was not armed at that point in time. We didn't know if he was playing possum, where he might be actually just laying in wait. This situation that every agency that I'm aware of trains for, where people after shootings have still been alive and waited for officers to get closer before they fired on them. I know here at Zach PD they talked about, of course I can't think of the officer's name or the suspect's name, but there was a time where officers approached the car where a shooting happened and the guy was laying in wait, and one of the officers got shot in the badge and shot in the hip. That was something they talked about during the academy. There was a scenario in the academy where we actually were in foot pursuit of an armed suspect or something like that, and almost exactly like this, suspect rounds a corner, and the idea for the proctors of the scenario was to see what we do when we as officers hit that corner. So you hit the corner, and if you do it right, you wait there, and suspect has a medical emergency. And they wanted to see what we would do now that the suspect's having a medical emergency. For the officers or the trainees that actually tried to go help him with the medical emergency, the guy was going to be laying in wait and shoot the officers that walked up on him. My partner at the time, who no longer works here, and I actually waited at the corner until the guy was not moving whatsoever before we actually ended up approaching him, and we were praised for doing it that way. So, I mean, we have like tons of training on situations almost exactly like this, where somebody could be still a potential threat versus immediate threat, and laying in wait for us to approach unprotected. So I kind of rambled there a little bit, but that's... What was the question again?
No, I was just asking as far as what you had said, and then you had given reasons as far as the tactical reload that you had told Officer Mercadal to do that.
Oh yeah, so I probably went way ahead, but yeah, the tactical reload was for that situation where the suspect might actually be laying in wait for us again, or might decide to start firing on us again if he's not actually down.
I think I shot about 5 times.
042745, what did you say here?
I think I shot about 5 times.
And why did you say that?
In my mindset at that time, I thought it was important to have a round count of how many times I actually shot on recording. Just for later on. I don't know. I thought it would be important to have how many times I thought I shot on as part of the recording, just for the homicide detectives or whatever reason. I just thought it would be important.
Stand by. Stand by on that. He's still down, he's not moving. I can't see the guy.
042800, what are you and Officer Mercadal saying here?
We're talking to, I think it was dispatch talking about how if it was clear for fire, and we were telling them to stand by on it because we didn't know if Stefan was still any type of threat at this point in time. We couldn't see the gun.
You say clear for fire, you mean clear for the fire department to enter?
Yeah, for the fire department to come assess the injuries. If it was a safe scene for fire, I should say.
You good? Yeah, I'm good. Alright, I'm gonna reload, okay? Oh, I got you. You got a line on him? Got him.
Okay, 042809, what is it that's being said here?
I was making sure that Terrence was ready, meaning like gun reloaded, magazine seated, just in case he needed to fire more rounds for whatever reason, if the threat was still there and he needed to address it. And before like I was making sure he was ready to go before I reloaded myself for the same reasons of actually like addressing any threat that might have come after this situation, any potential threat that might still be there.
Negative. Neither one of us are hit. We're okay. Suspect down.
042814 here, what is it that Officer Mercadal is saying here?
He said negative, neither one of us are hit, and suspects down.
Do you recall why that was said?
I don't recall. I don't remember what was said over the radio, or if it was somebody was looking for an update or something like that. I don't recall exactly why, but saying that neither one of us is hit, just I guess letting whoever know that we were okay.
All right. Yep.
042822, so just to kind of summarize, is this you conducting a tactical reload yourself?
Yes, it was.
And I think you already touched on the reasons earlier why that was being done here. So at this point here, why didn't you and Officer Mercadal make your approach of the suspect prior to any additional officers arriving on scene?
Because there's still a potential threat. The fact that Mr. Clark was still down on the ground doesn't mean that he wasn't alive and that he wouldn't shoot at us had we approached without, I mean, as you can see, it's just straight into the backyard. There's no cover. Even the corner of the house is not really complete cover because bullets can go through wood. But we didn't know for certain that one, he was even hit, because I do recall as I was shooting, I remember seeing Stefan still standing the whole time. And I actually didn't remember the second volley of 5 shots, But what I did remember was the first 5 shots, and then thinking to myself when it was happening, like, am I even hitting this guy? Like, I don't see him going down, I don't see him moving, I don't see anything. Of course, time had completely slowed down, and it felt like a lot longer than it actually was. But I remember thinking, like, I'm not even hitting this guy. And then the next thing I know is he was down on the ground. There was no him falling. There was no him putting his hands out like you can see on the Stars video. Or like putting his hand down on the ground, like going down slowly, I should say, not putting his hands out. But there was none of that from what I remember. It was him standing there, me shooting, and then all of a sudden him on the ground. So in my mind at this time, there's a high likelihood that we didn't even hit him, because I remembered shooting at him and him still standing. So the last thing I wanted to do was not have any type of protection between him and us as we approached him, especially not knowing where his hands were, not knowing if he was still alive, not knowing if he was still potentially a threat. Like, I just didn't want to put myself in that position, to put myself in a position of danger of possibly being shot by approaching him to render medical aid. Not yet, anyway.
One Charles 5-4. There's an older model. Looks like Chevy in the driveway. It's a brown house with. No, you're covered. You're covered. That's what the star is going out.
042844. What's being said here?
I'd have to actually look at the radio, but I think they had asked for the radio transcript in here, or it was just on.
No, it should be in there. But I was just.
If you recall.
If you can recall at the
Yeah.
time, what was being said and why it was being said.
Oh, I thought they were looking for like a landmark to get cover officers into the right house, and so I was trying to put that information out. And then, unbeknownst to me, Star was doing the same thing and had covered my radio traffic with their radio traffic. So sometimes when you're on the radio, you can, whoever keys up the mic first sometimes can talk over the other person. Sometimes it just cancels each other out and it's just squelch.
Before you move on, I kind of want to double back just briefly to the rendering medical aid question that you had asked. Officer Robinet, you mentioned sort of your mindset at the time, and you don't know if he's armed. Is this something that's based on your Sacramento Police Department training?
And within the Sacramento Police Department training, like I referred to that scenario in the academy and the other situations that we talked about. But yeah, and also in the U.S. Border Patrol, we train in the same type of situation. You don't approach a potentially dangerous situation without enough units, without tactical considerations like shields and gear and all that kind of stuff.
Thank you.
Give him a light. I got him. What?
So 042849. What's being said here?
I believe Officer Mercadal asked me to give him a light because more officers were showing up, and giving him the light was essentially me holding my flashlight up, and I put it on strobe so the other officers could actually see where we were. And we have a situation where rounds are just fired. The last thing you want is somebody coming in from a direction downrange, especially, or in a position that might put them in some sort of danger. So we wanted them to know exactly where we were. So.
And is that you, at this frame here, you're shining that flashlight towards 29th Street?
Towards 29th Street, yeah.
And is that basically to signal on upcoming officers who are arriving on scene to where your location is?
Yeah, it'll bring them to pretty much exactly where we're standing, which at that point in time is the safe area.
Okay. Want to take a break?
I'm good.
You good? Okay.
Let's keep going.
Keep going. All right.
Hey, we're good. We're good. Slow it down. Slow it down. We're good.
042854, what are you saying here and to who, if you can recall?
Talking to Officer Trujillo and Taylor, they had arrived, and I remember seeing Officer Taylor kind of running in quick, and I knew there was some debris and stuff in the area. The last thing I wanted him was to get hurt, so I was telling him to slow down. He didn't need to just come rushing in there, that he could, save himself, I guess, or not save himself, why am I saying that? But he could slow it down so he didn't get hurt. He didn't trip on some of the debris, or I know part of the fence was actually knocked over, so the fence that separated the side or the front area from the rear yard. So I was just telling him to slow it down a little bit.
SPD officers Taylor and Trujillo are the first responding backup officers to assist you and Officer Mercadal, correct?
Yes.
One Charles 5-4. I want everybody to know we are fine. No officers are hit. Subject's down in the backyard.
042903, can you explain what it is that you say here?
That was just another attempt because of how they came running in, and I know it's a pretty high-stress situation for even the officers that aren't on scene to know that there's been an officer-involved shooting. Pretty much everybody responds, and they respond code 3, which inherently is dangerous. That was just kind of one of those situations where I wanted to let everybody know that we, at that time, were okay. Like, neither Officer Mercadal or I were hurt. And that would just give other people responding a chance to kind of breathe, maybe slow down their driving a little bit, not go as crazy, just to make sure that everybody knew that. That's all I was just trying to do.
Down in the backyard.
To go back to what I was saying there, that was essentially so other responding officers don't get in a situation where they get hurt themselves.
Okay. It's 042904. Could you hear what Officer Taylor said there or asked?
I believe he asked where the gun was or something like that.
We haven't secured it. We're not moving in until we have more.
042908. What is it that you say here?
I told Officer Taylor that we hadn't secured it and that I didn't want to move in towards the backyard, towards Stefan, until we had essentially more resources, be it more people, or I know shortly after this I asked for a body bunker or a shield, a ballistic shield. That was definitely something that I wanted before we actually approached them.
When you say you haven't secured it, meaning you have not secured the suspect's firearm?
Yeah, we haven't secured the firearm.
We don't have it. What do you say, Jared?
042912 here. What does Officer Mercadal say here that you can...
He says we don't have it, and he asked me if I had seen it. Essentially what he's referring to and what I understood him to be talking about is we don't have visual of a firearm, and he asked me if I had seen the firearm.
I don't see it. He hasn't moved at all.
042915, what is it that you say here?
That I hadn't seen the firearm, and then Officer Trujillo asked me if he's moved, and I said he hasn't moved at all. Speaking about Stefan.
Right now,
042923, what does Officer Trujillo ask you? Can you recall, or what can you make out what it is she asked you or said to you?
I don't remember. It kind of sounded like she trailed off. I know eventually we talk about less lethal options to elicit a response from Stefan. But I don't know if that's what we're getting into at this point. I don't know if she even continued or if she just trailed off at this point.
Your response to her, that would sound something to the effect of right now, and you kind of stopped. Do you know what that was?
I have no idea. I probably started to say something and then just stopped talking because something else caught my attention, or, I mean, it's a hectic situation.
You want to get a tank? Not yet.
042925, what is it Officer Taylor asked here?
If I wanted to get him detained,
And what did that mean?
we wanted to go in there, approach Stefan, and place him in handcuffs.
And what was your reply to Officer Taylor?
Not yet. I still just didn't feel comfortable going in, even with the four of us. I didn't feel comfortable going in until we had some sort of physical barrier to use as cover.
Yeah, we're good.
042928, can you hear at all what Officer Trujillo said or asked there?
You can play it again. I didn't.
Not yet. Yeah, we're good.
Can you make out at all?
I don't know. I assume we're asking if we were all right or something like that.
Okay. Do you know what your response there? It sounded like you said, yeah, we're good. Do you know what that meant at all? Can you recall what you were responding to there?
Without knowing what she said, I can't say for certain, but I'm assuming she was probably asking if we were okay, and I was saying, yeah, we're okay. We're physically okay.
Now, at this point here, can you explain why you did not make your approach of the downed suspect with Officers Mercadal, Taylor, and Trujillo now on scene?
As I had mentioned previously, I was, again, I think I already said this, but right after this, I'm asking for a ballistic shield, which I'm sure I was already thinking about at this point, and I didn't want to approach somebody with a gun who I had no idea was still alive or not at this point in time. I did not want to approach that person without a ballistic shield or a physical barrier between us and them. That was my mindset at the time. There was just no reason to put any of us in danger, because yeah, there could be a bunch of bodies going in, or people, sorry, going in, officers going in to detain somebody who had just been in a shooting or been subjected to a shooting. And yeah, that's strength in numbers, but at the same time, all it takes is like a fraction of a second for him to turn over and fire a gun and shoot one of the four of us, which I still didn't want to happen.
One Charles 5-4. Can't see the subject's hands. He's still not moved. 375. If you can head this way, we can use the body bunker before we detain him.
042939, what is it that you're saying here?
I'm asking the sergeant who's responding 375, which was Sergeant Morris at the time, to bring a body bunker, which is essentially a slang term for a ballistic shield, to our position. That way we could actually safely approach him.
And was that request, what you're verbalizing there on the video, are you doing that over your radio?
Yeah, I'm doing it over the radio.
And can you describe what a body bunker is, or ballistic shield?
Ballistic shield is a shield about 4 feet tall by 1.5 to 2 feet wide. It's made out of ballistic materials. I'm not sure exactly what. It's made out of ballistic materials. It will withstand most handgun rounds. I think it won't withstand rifle rounds, but it's basically it's a shield. I mean, in every sense of the word. You carry it by hand, and you use it to protect the top 2/3 of your body when you're in a situation where there's somebody with a firearm that you need to approach.
On page 14 and 15 of your statement, you had stated, let me get to it there.
Oh, sorry. I was waiting for the question. 14 and 15?
14 and 15. You stated the reasoning you wanted the body bunker was because if the suspect had a gun and was not injured or still alive at that point, I didn't want to approach to detain him. And you also said in fear that he might still be able to get rounds off on us. Is that correct?
Yes.
And when you say get rounds off, what exactly does that mean?
Firing a firearm at our position. Shooting.
In referring to the tactical lifesaver course that you took, can you articulate any lesson plans and materials in that course that you feel that you can recall would apply in this scenario right here as to why no approach of the suspect had been made to this point?
When you talk about the three phases of casualty care, tactical casualty care, the situational awareness and scene safety. In this instance, even in the book right here, it talks about in the first phase, you're about to enter a tactical environment and a possible crime scene. Your safety is paramount, and the possibility still exists that you or other officers at some point may come under hostile fire. The tactical medic must at all times be fully aware of the surroundings and any potential threats. The likelihood of having to draw your weapon and engage a suspect with deadly force is possible, but extremely unlikely. So, basically what it's talking about is the entire scene. What the situation is, when it relates to this, is we have to make sure the scene is safe for us to actually approach the downed suspect. That's where that body bunker or ballistic shield would have come into play. Like, we want to have that to make sure all four of us at this point are safe as we approach the suspect who we believed had a gun.
And that portion that you read there, that's basically from an earmarked page from page 29 of the Tactical Lifesaver Course Student Guide. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then if I continue here, just the lower highlighted portions. You read the upper portion, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And then the other portions I got highlighted on here. Number 1, situational awareness and scene safety. Determine if your surrounding are free of immediate life-threatening concerns. Do not attempt to provide first aid if your own life is in imminent danger, correct?
Yes.
Does this material here appear to be consistent with your training regarding the Tactical Lifesaver course that you attended?
Yes, it does.
And in your opinion, would this information that you just read aloud here to this incident apply on March 18, 2018?
Yes.
And I think we already touched on it a little bit earlier, but just to reiterate, it appears that you as well as the other officers here are staying at the northwest corner of 29th Street as opposed to going out into the open area of the backyard. And again, can you explain why that is?
If we go into the open area in the backyard, there is absolutely no cover, meaning something that will protect you from bullets between us and Stephon Clark, where Stephon Clark was lying.
Hey, can you hear us? Police department, can you hear us?
We need to know if you're okay. We need to get you medics, but we can't go over there to get you help unless we know you don't have the weapon.
042956 here. What is it that that officers Mercadal, Taylor, and Trujillo are saying here?
They're making commands to Stephon to show his hands, and also trying to elicit some sort of response from him to show whether or not he was alive, if he was safe to approach, or to any number of situations. But basically, we're trying to get him to show us the hands and make sure that he isn't armed.
Hey, you guys, are you good right here? Alright, you guys, I'm gonna go give the correct address for this place. Whoa, which way? Yeah, it probably is. Okay.
0430 and 08 here. What's being said here?
We are trying to confirm the location of the scene for other responding officers. I wanted to make sure that it was out on the radio for everybody else, but Officer Mercadal told me that Star had already put it out, which is something I must have missed. Over the radio.
Sir, can you move? Can you hear us?
043017, what is it that Officer Trujillo is saying here?
She's asking Stefan if he can hear us and if he can move, trying to elicit some sort of response.
That's it.
Hmm?
You didn't move after that.
Has moved.
Okay.
043023, what's the exchange here between you and Officer Trujillo? Can you explain it?
She was asking if he's moved, and I just said he hasn't moved. As far as I knew, I hadn't been at the corner of the house for a little bit there.
Came up and then he kind of approached us, hands out, and
Yeah, he was
043030 here. Can you explain what's being said here by Officer Mercadal and you here?
I was kind of explaining what we had seen happen to Officer Taylor and Trujillo. That just kind of what we had seen. That's pretty much it. I demonstrated what I had seen to Officer Trujillo versus actually completing the statement.
What were you demonstrating to Officer Trujillo?
That Stefan had been in that punched out isosceles shooting position when we observed him prior to the shooting.
And what was the purpose
The
for you
purpose-
letting her know that?
Yeah, the purpose of us talking about this at the time was to ascertain whether or not there was a gun still at the scene, why we believe there was a gun, and just give them a reason to why there was a gun there at the scene.
So officer safety.
For officer safety.
Let's have the next unit just bring a non-lethal in case he's pretending, but let's just in case.
all right.
043045 here. What is it that Officer Trujillo is saying here?
She's bringing up the idea of getting like a non-lethal beanbag shotgun to basically, it sounds pretty horrible considering the circumstances that we know now, but it would be to shoot Clark with the non-lethal rounds because they're painful, and the thought would be that if he's pretending, he wouldn't be able to pretend to be dead through that pain. So she brought up that idea just as a way to see if he was alive still.
I provided you with General Order 580.12, less lethal weapon system, revision date 10/9/2012. And I'll read aloud the highlighted portions. Policy. It shall be the policy of the Sacramento Police Department to deploy and use less lethal weapon systems as instructed in the department training in order to maximize the safety of all individuals involved in an incident. Procedure. A. Definitions. Number 1. Flexible baton round, beanbag. A less lethal 2 3/4 12-gauge shotgun firing a Kevlar bag containing 40 grams of lead shot at a velocity of 280 feet per second. The drag-stabilized projectile delivers 112 foot-pounds of energy on impact. Flexible baton rounds are discharged from a dedicated 12-gauge shotgun that is distinguishable by an orange buttstock and foregrip. This round provides accurate and effective performance when fired from the approved distance of not less than 5 feet, but not more than 50 feet from the target. Deployment criteria. Number 1, less lethal weapon systems shall only be used in a manner that is consistent with department policy and training guidelines. Number 5, officers shall not deploy a less lethal weapon system unless specific information reasonably indicates the potential for the system's use. The circumstances of each incident shall dictate the reasonableness for the deployment. Section E, use of less lethal weapons. Number 1, use of less lethal weapon systems shall be consistent with General Order 580.02, use of force. Section 5, situations for the use of a less lethal weapon system may include but are not limited to A, self-destructive, dangerous, and/or combative individuals. C, circumstances where a tactical advantage can be obtained. Section F, tactical considerations. Number 1, If possible, when a less lethal weapon system is to be utilized, a sufficient number of officers should be assembled to assist with the physical custody of the targeted subject. The number of additional officers and their responsibilities shall be dictated by the dynamics of the incident. Section 2, unless extraordinary circumstances exist, consideration should be given to the following responsibilities. A, deploying officers, at least one officer to discharge the less lethal weapon system. Multiple officers with less lethal weapon systems may be utilized in a single incident. The use of canine and a conducted energy device may also be appropriate in concert with less lethal weapon systems. B, protection officers. A sufficient number of officers prepared to deliver appropriate force cover options given the immediate circumstances. C, custody officers. A sufficient number of officers who are responsible for handcuffing and restraining the subject. Number 3, under exigent circumstances, nothing in this order shall prohibit an officer from deploying and discharging a less lethal weapon without requesting authorization or having the presence of additional officers. Do you understand the general order that I had read there?
Yes.
Okay. Even though the less lethal shotgun was not actually deployed or used during this incident, it was considered. After reviewing that general order that I just read aloud, do you feel this incident on March 18, 2018 would have been a practical use for it at any point?
Do I feel... Yes, I feel we would have had a practical use for it.
And again, can you articulate as to why?
Most notably, circumstances where a tactical advantage can be obtained. We already had a situation where deadly force was necessary, but we also had a situation where we felt we needed to gain tactical advantage on somebody who's on the ground because we couldn't see his hands. We didn't know if he had a firearm. We thought maybe he could be pretending to be injured. It was possible that he could be pretending to be injured. So the use of a beanbag shotgun in this situation would have been helpful in obtaining that tactical advantage over him, because at that point, even though he's lying there, he really has an advantage on us, because if he's lying in wait or pretending to be injured, all it takes is for one of us to come out from a position of cover or concealment, and he would have been able to shoot or seriously injure one of us.
Are you aware of any other incidents in which a less lethal shotgun would be utilized with similar circumstances?
Any other situations like this?
Well, any other situations where the way you're describing how it would be used in this scenario, any other situations that you're aware of where it's been used in that way you're describing?
So I just want to be clear, are you asking for specific examples that he has experienced in the field?
That he knows of,
Okay.
that he has, that you have any knowledge of?
So
or
training, experience, or anecdotal?
Yes.
Okay.
Honestly, I haven't really been around the use of a beanbag shotgun. I've heard situations where, people have a knife and are sitting there. I think there was one recently where the subject had a knife and was just kind of standing there downtown and wouldn't comply with commands, and so they fired a beanbag shotgun at him to get him to comply and drop the knife. More than anything else, what I've experienced and heard of more often is in a situation very similar to this, officers would use a canine as to go in and actually bite or approach the suspect to determine whether or not he was faking. It's a painful experience to get bitten by a dog, and it's hard to maintain your what's the word I'm looking for? When you're faking, I can't think of the right word, sorry. But it's hard to maintain that ruse when a dog's biting you. So it was kind of in a sense, a similar idea to that, but instead of a canine, you'd be using the shotgun beanbag rounds.
Do you recall any training that would be that similar to this situation where they've discussed using a beanbag shotgun?
To be honest, I don't remember specifically being told a situation like this in training. I'm sure the beanbag shotgun training had some sort of situation like this. It didn't just, it was an idea that just kind of materialized out of nowhere. So no, I don't actually remember any specific training on this. But the beanbag shotgun training was a little while ago.
The helicopter air unit star was on scene throughout the entirety of this incident, correct?
Yes, as far as I recall.
Did you consider asking the air unit to visually verify if the suspect was still armed or a threat while you were waiting?
Don't recall asking that. No.
Is there a reason why that?
I honestly don't even think it crossed our minds.
Why not?
Why didn't it cross our minds? I have no idea why it didn't. It just didn't. It's one of those things that had been. Yeah, I don't even know if we've ever been actually taught something like that. It sounds like a good idea now, but I don't recall why we didn't think about it. I can't really answer that.
Okay.
Just didn't.
Do you feel the air unit could have realistically verified if the suspect was still armed or a threat, where as a result you could make a safe approach at that point?
I think it would have been worth asking, but considering the scene and the length of the grass and the individual's clothing and like that, from my experience with helicopters, especially in the city limits, they wouldn't have been able to get low enough to actually make a positive determination. I think they might have been able to give us a better idea, but at the same time, I don't think he would have been able to say for certain, considering all the circumstances around where Stefan was lying and the limitations by helicopters within city limits.
Hey, go get a non-lethal.
Go get him.
Oh, hey, Sarge.
043111 here. What is it that you said here?
I asked the sergeant to go grab a non-lethal. I didn't realize it was the sergeant that was running up at the time that I asked him to do that, or else I would have asked him to go get the shield.
Okay, well, let's get a...
043115, Sergeant Morris, 3 Sam 5 arrives on scene here, correct?
Yes.
Let me back up just a second here. I wanted you to just draw your attention to what Sergeant Morris says here when he first shows up.
About not having the bunker.
Okay, well, let's...
Here.
Okay, well, let's get...
Do you recall what Sergeant Morris says there?
He says he doesn't have a bunker and we're just going to have to go in and get him, or something like that.
A non-lethal. Let's get a non-lethal. Hit him a couple times with that before we...
043121 here. What did you say to Sergeant Morris?
I was asking him to, well, I was saying let's get a non-lethal so we could strike him with the beanbag rounds a couple times to see if that would elicit a response from him.
I'll just grab it just to have it.
What do you have on him?
043131. What did Sergeant Morris ask you here?
He asked what he had on him.
Like this, something in his hands. It looked like a gun from our perspective.
043135. You appear to demonstrate with your arms out forward. Is that correct?
Yes.
And can you explain what you're saying and demonstrating here?
I'm demonstrating to Sergeant Morris what we saw. The isosceles shooting position, the firing stance, that there was something in his hands, because even up to this point, there is no confirmation that it was an actual firearm, but we just believed it was. But the point being, what I was telling him was that there was actually something in his hands when he was pointing his hand, when his hands were in that shooting position. Essentially telling him what we saw without saying for certain that there was a firearm. Again, that was kind of based on talking to the camera as well as Sergeant Morris. I didn't want to say anything that would be like, I guess, detrimental or something that I could perjure myself with later on. I didn't want to be like, confirm something that I didn't actually know.
And I know we've touched on it a couple times already about the reason that you had not approached the suspect even with additional officers. Now with Sergeant Morris on scene, would there be any other differing reasons as why an approach of the suspect at this point would not have been made, as opposed to what you've already articulated earlier?
Any differing reasons why an approach wouldn't have been made at this point?
At this point with Sergeant Morris on scene here.
In my opinion, there is no difference. I think I understood that question correctly.
At that time, did you have any concerns of the potential of additional suspects at all?
No.
To touch back on your statement on page 12 of your statement to homicide investigators. Where you had stated you stopped firing at the suspect once he was down and was no threat anymore, correct?
Yes.
Can you explain or articulate, with that in mind, why no approach had been made to this point of the suspect if he was not a threat anymore at that point of concluding discharging your firearm?
At this point in time when I made this statement, I was referring to the fact that there was no immediate or imminent threat to the safety of Officer Mercadal or I at this time when he fell to the ground. However, there was still definitely a potential threat because we were unable to see the weapon that we perceived to be there. We were unable to see his hands, and we were unable to elicit any response from him whatsoever. So it's not like there was absolutely zero threat and we could just walk up and, without any consideration for our safety. There was still the potential that something dangerous was there, and that's why we didn't approach.
Good?
043148 here. Can you describe what's happening at this point?
Sergeant Morris had just told us to go. So we're approaching where Stefan laid to render medical aid and make the scene safe.
Was this approach done without a body bunker?
Yes, it was.
To your knowledge, were any less lethal weapons deployed or in use during the approach at this time on your approach to the suspect?
I honestly do not remember.
And do you recall if a decision was made by anyone as why to approach the suspect was being made at this time to this point?
The decision was Sergeant Morris. He just said that we needed to go do it, and so we did. I think I answered the question. Was there more to it? Yeah.
Do you recall if any kind of plan as to who would be designated as cover officers, hands officers, less lethal options was discussed prior to your approach?
I don't think it was discussed prior. I do remember that it was discussed kind of during. I don't know if it actually was put into effect, but it was discussed as we were walking up.
When you guys want to go hands, cover them.
043151. What did you say here?
I was asking somebody to just go hands, meaning be the person that does the cuffing and the hands-on, because we didn't all need to have some sort of weapon system out at that time.
Fuck.
043153. What is it that you say here?
Oh, fuck.
And can you explain why that was said at that time?
Because I saw the cell phone. And I think that was when it dawned on me what he had in his hands.
(0431-56). Sergeant Morris physically contacts the suspect here, correct?
Yes.
(0432-02). Can you describe what's being done here?
I believe he's being rolled over onto his back to perform CPR. I don't know if he'd been cuffed yet, though, or if he was cuffed.
Waistband? Yeah, we'll just start shooting CPR. 3 stamp for 5. Waistband?
(0432-04). Can you describe what happens here?
The cell phone gets moved out of the way.
How does it? I'm sorry, go ahead.
I moved it out of the way. I don't know why. It was just kind of a reaction.
Yeah, we'll just start shooting CPR. 3 stamp for 5. Send fire in. Go through.
(0432-09). Can you hear what some of the things that Sergeant Morris is saying here?
I heard him ask to send fire in. I think they should have been staging already, but yeah, he asked him to send him in, code 3.
Right. Too far? Yes. Come over. Both of us here. Yeah.
(0432-25). What is being said between you and Sergeant Morris here?
He asked me if I fired, and referring to Officer Mercadal and I said we both did, and he's taking us out of the scene.
How many rounds did you fire? We both shot southbound. I shot about 5 times. I don't know exactly how many.
(0432-35). Can you describe what's being said here?
And he's basically doing the safety, what's it called? Safety brief or
Public safety statement.
Public safety statement, where he's asking us which direction we fired and how many times.
And what is it that you said?
I said that I had shot southbound and pointed in that direction, and I said about 5 times, but I didn't remember exactly how many times.
About 5 times. Just come out of it. Where were you with? Break it down. Break it down. Wait.
(0432-43). And then what's further being said here between you and Sergeant Morris?
He asked who I was with, and advised I was with Officer Mercadal.
We doing okay? Anything?
Oh, fine.
You're good? Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
Referring to the round count form that I provided you with, a round count was done or was conducted by homicide investigators with you, correct?
Yes.
And this round count was done prior to your actual interview with homicide?
From what I remember, yes.
And it was determined in that round count that your firearm was missing 10 live rounds of ammunition, which would indicate you fired 10 rounds as opposed to 5, correct?
Yes.
Based on your training and experience, can you explain why that discrepancy might be, where you initially thought or believed you fired your handgun 5 times, but it was more than that?
My training experience has taught me that there's a lot of psychological reactions that happen during high stress situations, officer involved shootings being one of those high stress situations. The mind does some funny things in those types of situations, and for me in particular in this situation, it was that I didn't remember the second volley of shots, the second volley of 5 shots. I talked about it earlier. I didn't remember a lot of that quick period of time, and like I said, training experience, things I've read. That's just a typical reaction to adrenaline dumps in the body. That's what I'm assuming is the discrepancy, because I still to this day have no recollection of that second volley.
Would you consider this incident a very stressful situation?
Oh, very, very stressful.
Is he responsive, breathing at all?
043251. What is it that you said here?
Is he responsive or breathing at all?
And who was that question directed towards?
I don't know. I think anybody that might have been over by Stefan at that period in time.
Can you explain why you asked that? Why you said that?
General concern. I didn't like the fact that I had been in that situation. I didn't like the fact that we had shot him, and this is pretty soon after I had realized that it was just a cell phone, and I was concerned. I was kind of hoping that there was some hope that he'd still be alive.
Could you describe, or do you recall what the officers who were over there, what they were doing immediately around the downed suspect at all?
They're doing CPR.
Can you bring a mask? Rescue mask? Rescue mask? I got it. Go ahead, go.
043308. Can you describe what's happening here?
They're calling for a rescue mask, a breathing, something where you didn't have to go lip to lip for CPR for rescue bus. I know there was an officer coming in from the street that we ended up asking to go back for one. I think that's pretty much what was happening in that brief exchange right there. We were just asking another officer to go grab one from his car.
Were you getting directed to walk this direction back towards 29th Street?
Yeah, we had been told to go back out this way, between the multiple other things that Sergeant Morris was dealing with at that time. He had started directing us away from the scene.
Sergeant Morris was.
Yeah.
No, we need a... Go inside, please. You?
043334. You, Officer Mercadal, and Officer Lundgren appear to meet up on the west sidewalk of 29th Street near 29th Street. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And someone said mute. Is that correct?
Yes.
Do you recall which officer said that?
No, I don't.
Hey, you guys good?
043339. What does Officer Lundgren ask or say here?
It says, "Hey, are you guys good?"
And 043340 appears that your body-worn camera mutes at this point, correct?
Yes.
Do you recall what was said between you, Officer Lundgren, and Officer Mercadal at this time?
Not verbatim, but it was essentially in line with him asking us if we were good. He was checking on our well-being, just making sure that we were okay.
Can you recall the reasoning for muting your body-worn camera at that point?
Well, at the time, there was no direct policy on muting. I actually taught the body-worn camera class, and part of the things that we taught the students in using them is that you could use the mute function in order to prevent personal conversations from being discovered in court or whatever. Like, you're talking about your family, talking about your kids, talking on the phone. In a situation like this, something personal is like, hey, how are you guys? And if Officer Mercadal or I stated something like, wow, it's so fucked up, or something like that, then that wouldn't be caught on camera, or in audio anyway. So the point there was we were just having a personal conversation that at the time we were told it was okay to mute the cameras for.
043351, it appears that Officer Lundgren points in a western direction towards 29th Street. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And can you describe if something was said to him, or if what he's doing or what's being said there?
I honestly don't remember. It might have been just pointing him towards the scene. I think he was going to go see if he could help with anything.
The 043412, Sergeant Morris appears and where you and Officer Mercadal are standing, correct?
Yeah.
And from this point forward, it appears that you and Officer Mercadal and Sergeant Morris are out in front of 29th Street. Do you recall what conversation, if any, was being had between you or Sergeant Morris or Officer Mercadal up to the point that your body camera stops at 043549?
The only thing that I recall going on at this point in time was the neighbor from the house where the sliding glass window had been broken out was standing out front of his house trying to report that his window had been broken. And I had told him to go back in his house and the officer would talk to him, and then told him again to go back in his house and the officer would come talk to him, and then Sergeant Morris came out and I believe started to kind of direct us like, hey, you go here, you go there, like sending me to my car and sending Officer Merkel in another car with buddy officers or whatever you like to call them. But I don't remember him saying much else than that, other than eventually like, hey, you guys still on, and then turn them off.
Okay. So the next question I was going to ask you was the reason for when you did deactivate or turn off your body-worn camera, where you indicated that Sergeant Morris told you to.
Sergeant Morris told us to.
Okay.
I think shortly after there was a lieutenant put it out over the radio too, to deactivate the body cameras.
I provided you with General Order 525.07 body-worn camera, revision date 4/26/2017. I'll read aloud the highlighted portions. Policy. It shall be the policy of the Sacramento Police Department to utilize a body-worn camera in a manner that will assist in criminal prosecutions or civil litigation by providing a recording of the incident that may supplement an employee's report and help document professional police conduct. A. General. All officers issued a body-worn camera are required to wear and use their body-worn cameras while working in uniform. A uniform is to be considered the standard uniform as well as any apparel, example tactical, raid vests, that identifies the wearer as a police officer. Body-worn camera video provides additional information regarding an investigative or enforcement contact with a member of the public. As body-worn camera recordings provide only a limited perspective of the encounter, all other available evidence such as witness statements, officer interviews, forensic analysis, and documentary evidence should be considered before any conclusions are reached. 3. Body-worn cameras should assist in the following: documenting an initial police response. Section B, employee responsibility. Subsection 2, employees assigned a body-worn camera shall. Subsection C, affix their issued body-worn cameras to their uniforms at the beginning of their shift in accordance with training and the manufacturer's guidelines. The body-worn camera shall be worn for the entire shift. Section C, required activation of the body-worn camera. Number 1, this policy is not intended to describe every possible situation in which the body-worn camera should be utilized. Not all situations will clearly start out as necessitating the activation of the body-worn camera, nor will all events have a clear ending when the body-worn camera is no longer necessary. Number 3, employees shall activate their body-worn cameras during initial enforcement or investigative activity, whether self-initiated or in response to a dispatch call. Examples include, but are not limited to, the following. Section C, when conducting pedestrian and vehicle contacts. D, while responding to any in progress, just occurred, or any other call for service in which the fleeing suspect and/or vehicles may be captured leaving the crime scene. E, when responding to calls reportedly involving weapons or violence. G, when pursuing a suspect on foot. H, during Code 3 responses including vehicle pursuits, regardless of whether the vehicle is equipped with an in-car camera system. I, while executing searches of individuals, vehicles, buildings, and other places. K, when conducting arrests, detentions, and/or citations. Section D, deactivation of the body-worn camera. Except as listed below, once activated, officers shall not deactivate their body-worn cameras until the investigative or enforcement activity involving a member of the public has reasonably concluded. If enforcement or investigative activity with a member of the public resumes, the officer shall reactivate the body-worn camera and continue recording. 2, employees may deactivate the body-worn camera at any time based on their discretion in the following circumstances. Section A, when the employee is discussing tactical or confidential information with other law enforcement personnel, during briefings, or during conversations with confidential informants. Section C, when it is necessary to discuss issues or concerns with an employee, supervisor, doctor, nurse, or paramedic in private. Section 3, details regarding the reason for deactivation should be recorded and documented where appropriate. Do you understand the general order that I read there?
I do.
Okay. In reviewing this incident regarding your body-worn camera and its use on March 18, 2018, do you feel you complied with or violated that general order?
I feel like I complied with.
Can you explain why?
Because all the stuff covered in required activation of the body camera was on for. The arrest, the detention, the foot pursuit, contacting somebody, all that stuff. At the point in time when this policy was out, muting wasn't actually classified as deactivating. When it comes into like Section D2A, when the employee is discussing tactical or confidential information with other law enforcement personnel during briefings or during conversation with confidential informants, that was essentially taken to cover that part where we're discussing personal information. The necessary discussion issues with concerned employees who were doctor, nurse, or paramedic in private. When they're talking about deactivating in this policy, at the time it was actually shutting the whole thing off. Muting wasn't considered deactivating. Muting, and it wasn't in the policy anywhere where we talked about when you couldn't mute the body camera. It was actually just something that we discussed in the training, like in these situations, muting would be okay. Personal conversations were one of those situations.
For the record, in reviewing body-worn camera footage, approximately 4 minutes and 57 seconds elapsed between when yours and Officer Mercadal's gunfire ceased to the point officers first made physical contact with the suspect, Stephon Clark. Approximately 59 seconds after that, officers began CPR on Clark. Does that sound accurate?
Yes. I mean, according to the body cam footage, yes. I didn't know it was that long at the time.
In your opinion, do you feel it was reasonable to wait that amount of time up to when officers made contact with Clark and to render first aid?
In my opinion, it was reasonable to wait for additional resources and potentially using a body bunker or ballistic shield before we approached, because of the potential danger that was there in approaching Mr. Clark without those resources. So if it took that long to get him, then yes, it was reasonable.
I provided General Order 522.02, Emergency Care for Individuals Under Police Care or Control, revision date 5/16/2017. I'll read out aloud the highlighted portions here. Policy. It shall be the policy of the Sacramento Police Department to provide emergency medical treatment to individuals under police care or control while ensuring their safety and that of others during treatment. Procedure. A. Emergency medical treatment. Number 1. Officers having any doubt concerning a person's condition shall request emergency medical assistance. 2. Officers shall provide first aid to injured parties if it can be done safely. C. Emergency medical authority. The highest level paramedic emergency medical technician on scene is in charge and responsible for the examination, treatment, and transportation of medical patients. And that's as far as we can deal with that. In your opinion, when was the suspect under police care and control, as stated under 522.02?
He was under care and control the moment that we fired on him and he went down.
Okay.
No. Pursuant to this policy, when do you believe that you and other officers had him under control?
Had him under control? I thought you were referring to like custody and control being a different.
You're referring to this general order.
Okay.
When do you feel that the suspect was under police care and control?
I guess that when we approached him and began CPR, as far as like the medical treatment, before we could, I get what you're saying. Yeah, when we approached him and began CPR is when he was under our control, like for medical purposes, for CPR purposes.
In your opinion, do you feel you were able to provide first aid or that officers were able to provide first aid to the suspect safely as stated in Section A, subsection 2, any sooner than when you made your eventual approach of the down suspect?
Do I think it could have been done sooner, safely? No, that's why we didn't approach.
And again, can you articulate why?
Because we didn't have the necessary resources to approach him and to safely begin CPR. We were waiting for additional resources. We were waiting for body bunker at that point in time until Sergeant Morris arrived on scene and said, just let's go. It was my opinion that it wasn't safe to approach because we didn't have those other resources.
In your opinion, do you feel that you complied with or violated General Order 522.02?
I feel like I complied with it.
Okay, and why?
Medical assistance is automatically going to be requested in a situation like this, and I don't remember if Terrence or I called for fire prior, but it was already staging because dispatch will do that automatically. So medical was coming, and we knew that. Us providing first aid, as previously stated, in my opinion, it wasn't safe to do so until we had further resources because of the potential threat that Stefan still posed to both Officer Mercadal and I. We believed he had a firearm, and we couldn't see his hands. He was in a position that didn't allow us to see his hands. He wasn't responding to our commands, and we had no cover between him and the side of the house where we were actually standing. There was a lot of referred to as no man's land between him and I, where we would have had absolutely zero cover if he was still alive and potentially fired on us. The time it took to get more resources there was necessary because we needed those other resources to actually perform medical aid safely. So that's why we didn't violate this policy.
Would it have been reasonable to direct fire or medics to enter the scene and medically treat the suspect prior to officers safely securing the scene and arresting or detaining the suspect?
No.
based on your training and experience, will fire enter a crime scene that has not been secured yet by law enforcement?
It doesn't even have to be a crime scene. Sometimes they won't enter something if there's an argument in the background. They won't enter scenes until we can tell them that it's safe. That's just their policy, and their training tells them not to do that.
Regarding your decision to delay in the amount of time you did in approaching and treating the suspect, in your opinion, do you feel your actions pertaining to that would be considered a neglect of duty?
No,
And why not?
because of all the things I've mentioned before. I didn't neglect on my duty. I waited until I believed the scene was safe for us to render medical aid. And cover, resources, believing there was a firearm there, believing that he might potentially be faking injuries, and not wanting to put other officers or myself in a position of peril, in a position where it would take less than a second for Stefan to turn around or even just point the gun behind himself and shoot. It would have been tactically unsafe, tactically unsound to actually approach him until we had those additional resources that would allow us to do it safely.
In your opinion, do you feel any of your actions regarding this officer-involved shooting on March 18, 2018 would be considered a neglect of duty?
No.
Looking back at the incident, did you ever think that the suspect wanted the police to shoot him?
That was my first thought after everything calmed down. It's the only reasonable explanation for the actions that Mr. Clark performed. Reasonable, use that word lightly here, but what's not really reasonable, but it was the only reasonable explanation for those actions, I should say.
Did you know Stefan Clark prior to this incident?
No.
To your knowledge, had you ever had any interactions or dealings with Stefan Clark prior to this incident?
No.
Did you have any reason to know that the fleeing suspect, Stefan Clark, was running into a family member's backyard at 29th Street just prior to the shooting?
No idea.
I'm just going to refer to dispatch audio here.
South, no movement for any additional units. Come in from the west to east, West Yard.
So 0843 dispatch asks, is fire clear to enter? Does that sound correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you recall if you copied that question at the time at all?
If this was when we told him to stand by, then yeah, I remember hearing it. I think I remember hearing it because I would explain why I told him to stand by.
We got several people coming out to all the houses here, so we're going to need several units.
There's multiple around. Forward, fire, clear to enter.
So at 9:13 here on the audio, dispatch asks 5-4 is fire clear to enter. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And I'll play it a little further here. So at 0922 here on the audio, Officer Mercadal replies, negative, neither one of us are hit, we're okay, suspect down. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Do you know if Mercadal's response as negative indicated that it was not clear for fire to enter, or do you think that the question was understood differently?
I don't know why he responded that way. Why Officer Mercadal responded that way.
And again, at that point in this, would it have been safe for fire to enter the scene and treat the suspect anyway?
No. And honestly, we were still probably figuring out what just happened.
On March 19th, 2018, you provided your voluntary statement to SPD Homicide Detective Griggs regarding your involvement in SPD case 18-82449. If you could refer to page 7 of your statement in that case. You stated that when you responded to this call, the suspect description indicated on the call that the suspect was a male black as to his ethnicity. Is that correct?
Yes, that's what I stated.
Okay. In reviewing the CAD call printout, which I know you have a copy of here, and the audio recording from SPD radio traffic, as well as listening to the audio recording from the caller to SPD dispatch, I was unable to locate any documentation or information which indicated that the suspect was a male black. Can you explain where that information in your statement came from regarding the suspect's ethnicity?
My only explanation for that was at the time of the interview, I knew that it was a male black. I knew that Stefan was a male black at the time of the interview. I probably didn't remember exactly what the dispatch had said, so I just put what I knew into what I thought I knew and ended up saying male black was part of the dispatch. But after the fact, I realized that I said that, and like way after the fact, days after the fact, I realized that I had said that when in actuality the dispatch had said that, or did not indicate a race.
Do you recall if described the suspect's ethnicity to you at all, and Officer Mercadal, when you first contacted him when your body-worn camera had no audio?
No, he didn't.
Okay. Sergeant?
I have one follow-up on
Yeah,
that.
absolutely.
If you recall, when was the moment that you realized Stefan Clark's race?
The moment that we walked up on him to detain him, start CPR. That was the first indication that I had that he was a male black.
I just have a few things. You and Officer Mercadal, how long had you worked together?
How long we worked together? In what sense, I guess? I mean,
Well, let me ask you.
like on that team, for that.
Can you estimate how many calls you've been on together?
I wouldn't even know where to start. We'd only been on that team together for a few months. He worked in 5C where I worked in 5B, so we hadn't been on too many calls together, but I'm sure that there had been a few calls that we had answered together. I know there was that day. We were on a call together previous to this call.
Okay. Going back to Sergeant Bullard asked you if you developed a plan when you arrived to the scene of this incident. How many times, just an estimate, do you think you've responded to a call like this where it's some preliminary information, there's possibly a suspect still outstanding that's still in the area?
Oh, hundreds and hundreds. I mean, in the 5 years that I've been here, at that time, the 5 years that I've been here, I mean, it was easily hundreds. I mean, that happens every single day, multiple times a day.
And are there standard steps you take when responding to a call like that? As far as obtaining information, determining if a crime took place, things like that?
Suspect description, what they observed, what they knew, the direction the suspect went, things that I can update other units to if need be, or go look for myself.
So if you're responding to a scene like this with a partner, which is typical, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel it's necessarily you have to verbalize your plan, since both of you have been through the same type of call numerous times and understand the foundationary steps to investigating this?
Yeah, I think that's kind of what I was trying to refer to. Is it's essentially just knowing what we're gonna do. I mean, there's no point in pulling out my notepad and drawing out a diagram of our plan or anything like that. It's just we do it so often that we just kind of know what steps are gonna happen. Like, had I been in a different position and seen Officer Mercadal walk up to the front door of the house where we know the suspected vehicle burglar had ran to, I would have assumed he's just going to go knock on the door and ask to go check the back door of the house. Like, it's just automatic.
I want to touch a little bit on the beanbag shotgun. And just for the record, can you describe what a beanbag shotgun is?
It's a shotgun that shoots a projectile made of a Kevlar bag with small weighted pellets in it. It's designed to not kill or maim, but instead just incapacitate the person you're firing at. Basically, it's designed to be a pain compliance kind of tool.
About how long is it?
How long is the
Approximately how
the
long
shotgun?
is the shotgun?
Oh, it's the size of a standard shotgun. I think like a 28-inch barrel or something like that, 28-inch length overall.
Any idea about how heavy it is?
I'd say it weighs at least, I don't know, between 9 and 15 pounds, 10, 15 pounds.
Is
It
there
might be
a
a little much.
carrying handle on it? Anything
There's
you can use?
There's
to
a
secure
pistol
it?
grip on some of them and a sling on others, but it's still, the length and weight makes it difficult to carry, just generally carry around.
Is it? Would you consider it comfortable or awkward during a movement, maybe jogging or running?
It would be extremely awkward to jog or run with that.
What about, say, a yard search where you may have to go over a fence or squeeze between two tight objects? Is that something? Is the less lethal shotgun something that would be comfortable to carry while participating in a?
I don't know if comfortable would be it would be completely impractical. It would get in the way, especially with the sling system that we have. It would get in the way, it would be loud, it would be noisy. If we carried it in a position where it would be easier to manipulate, that would take away our tactical advantage of being able to get to our weapon system, like our firearm, quickly in the need that we need to use it, which, if you notice in the body cam footage, we will clear every unknown situation with our firearms, or should be clearing every unknown situation with our firearms. Carrying a non-lethal shotgun at that point in time would really hinder our ability to, one, carry the shotgun and our firearm at the same time, or to get to our firearm if needed.
So are you familiar with the concept of contact and cover?
Yes.
So were you and Officer Merkdahl kind of using contact and cover when you first arrived to the incident?
Yes. It's one of those things that ebbs and flows as the situation develops. I was initially when I was contacting the person that lived inside. Officer Mercadal became contact when he was the first to see Stefan Clark before running into the backyard.
When you're utilizing contact and cover, actually, can you describe exactly what that concept is? If you're the contact officer, what are your duties?
You contact officer, you're the one contacting the suspect, subject, witness, victim, whatever it may be, in order to talk to them. Your focus is that particular person and the dangers that they might potentially show or might be potential with that person. Your focus is that one person, and anything that kind of goes along with that one person. Talking to them, getting a statement. The cover is basically watching your back, watching the surrounding area for any other possible threats or potential hazards or whatnot that might come from around the person that the contact officer is talking to.
So in a two-officer situation like you and Officer Merkdahl were in at the beginning of the incident, would the contact officer be responsible for searching someone?
For searching somebody?
Yes. Actually physically contacting, physically laying hands, searching,
Yeah.
handcuffing.
Of course, depending on the circumstance,
Of course,
but yeah.
just standard training procedurally.
Standard, yeah, the contact person would be responsible for that.
And the cover person, you said, would be responsible for kind of the safety and to as kind of an overwatch of the contact officer or any other dangers possibly.
Yeah, I think that's a good word for it. Overwatch would be, yeah.
The cover officer, would they primarily utilize lethal or less than lethal as a tool? If it's just the two officer.
The cover or
the cover officer.
the cover officer? It's really dependent on the situation. What's necessary at the time, really, is what the cover officer would use. I mean, like you say, a typical arrest team. So let's, throw a hypothetical out there and say that you only have 2 people for an arrest team. Then typically the cover officer will be using lethal weapon. Well, the contact is going to be the one that does the hands, the cuffing, the searching, and all that stuff.
If a third officer to arrive after that, would that officer primarily use a less lethal option?
The third officer would be using a less lethal option.
But it's dependent on the totality of the circumstances.
Exactly.
I mean,
Depending on the totality of the circumstances.
In your training experience, is it beneficial for 2 officers to be giving commands to a subject at the same time?
No. Confusion reigns when that happens. Usually you typically have, and we'll go with that contact cover kind of situation, contact officer is going to be issuing commands. That way you have clear, concise commands of what exactly the contact person wants to happen. If you have multiple people yelling commands, then people get confused and don't really know exactly whose directions to follow, especially if they're different from each other.
Typically, is the first officer that makes verbal contact with a subject kind of just de facto designated the command giver?
Sometimes that person isn't very strong vocally and somebody else takes over. Or sometimes that officer loses their train of thought and doesn't know what to say, and so somebody else takes over. I mean, it's all, again, dependent on circumstances and on what's happening.
Is there a difference between giving commands and echoing commands?
By definition, yeah. I guess I'm kind of confused what you mean. Is there a difference between giving and echoing?
Echoing would be maybe the reinforcement of a command that's already given.
Yeah, in that sense. I mean, sometimes people repeat what other people say just because they don't know what else to do and they're trying to be helpful, or yeah, I mean, it's or reinforcing the command, making sure somebody heard it. So yeah, there'd be a difference there.
Are you aware of any instance, whether in the department or anecdotally, where a suspect has, or a subject has broken into a house in the process of maybe trying to flee and procured weapons of any type inside of the house they've broken into?
I'm pretty sure that's the exact scenario that happened in the Dazion Flinaw, I think is how you say his name, shooting. He broke into a house and obtained weapons from within the house. weapons that he later used to actually attack the officers that were involved in the shooting, I believe, something like that. That's the one specific example that strikes me that comes out. I'm sure there are a bunch of other ones. Weapons of any type, be it kitchen knives, shovels, spikes, whatever, are always in homes. Everybody has kitchen knives.
That's all I have.
You want to take a break?
Yeah, let's take a break.
Okay. It is 12:20.
Second.
12:26 hours. We're back on the record. Did you?
Let me find my closing here.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yep.
Or did you want to ask that before I do the closing?
Yeah, okay. Officer Robinet, do you have anything to add regarding this incident that we have covered today?
The only thing that I wanted to touch base on was that question considering the care and control of Mr. Clark after the shooting. I didn't quite understand what the question meant. I was kind of thinking more along the lines of a Fourth Amendment seizure, which after the shooting was a Fourth Amendment seizure. But to clarify, what I think the question was actually getting at was he was under our control once we approached, put cuffs, and started CPR. In between the shooting, which was the seizure, and the cuffing and CPR, the scene and Mr. Clark were not under our control. I think that makes sense.
So you believe at the time that you approached Mr. Clark to render medical aid and you put the cuffs on, I believe you're saying that is the time when you feel the scene was safe and thus you had care and control of Mr. Clark?
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say, but more eloquently.
Okay. Anything else that you'd like to add at all? Or
No.
No. Thank you.
All right. Is there anything else related to this matter that we have not covered that needs to be added, clarified, or changed? If so, I'm ordering you to provide this information right now.
Not that I'm aware of.
After you leave this interview, should you remember anything that is different from or in addition to the information that you have given today, I am ordering you to contact Sergeant Bullard immediately. I am also ordering you to not discuss this matter with any other department employees. Do you understand these orders?
Yes, I do.
Concluding interview at 12:33.
12, what time?
I'm sorry, 12:23. No, 12:20. 12:27.
12:27.